Chapter 216. Li Mu and Xiao Bai swaggered out of the Ministry of Justice and basked in the gazes of the people on the streets. Then they returned to the government office. However, the incident at the Aroma Tavern had already spread within a small circle. Did you hear? Just now at the Aroma Tavern, the son of Minister Councillor Wei of the Ministry of Revenue, Wei Peng, was beaten up. Who would be so daring to do such a thing? Could it be the son of another family? It's the constable of the divine capital. 2 days ago, the son of Minister Zhu of the Ministry of Rights was beaten up by him. Is the constable purposely against these people? Will the Ministry of Justice let him off? There's more to come. After arriving at the Ministry of Justice, Wei Peng was beaten up again, but the constable walked out unscathed. The commoners were happy to see this kind of thing. They were usually bullied by these people. When had they ever seen them being bullied? Just thinking about it made them feel incomparably happy. A young man walked on the streets of the divine capital with a few attendants behind him. Hearing the discussions of the people on the streets, he looked surprised. He said, "I went out to play for a few days and something like this happened in the divine capital?" One of the attendants behind him said, "Minister Councillor Wei and the master are close friends. How could the master let him be beaten up in the Ministry of Justice? It must be the groundless rumors spread by these ignorant people." The young man nodded and said, "I think so too. How could there be such an arrogant person in the divine capital? He dared to beat up the son of an official just by looking at him." Bang! He was walking on the streets when he accidentally bumped into a person walking towards him. It was obvious that the person in front of him had deliberately bumped into him. Xianxia frowned and looked at the person. The constable looked at him coldly. "What are you looking at?" Before Xianxia could react, a fist grew larger in front of his eyes. The two attendants reacted quickly. One of them blocked the constable's fist while the other attacked his chest. The constable's footwork changed and he easily dodged the follower's attack. His fist also changed direction and landed on Xiao's other eye. After a sharp pain, a bruise appeared on Xiao's right eye. "How dare you? How dare you?" The two followers were furious. Just as they were about to attack again, the constable pulled out his sword and pointed at them. He said coldly, "Have you considered the consequences of attacking and arresting people on the streets of Luoyang?" The two of them paused. Assaulting and arrest was a serious crime, much more serious than fighting. Moreover, the aura that was inadvertently leaked out from that person's two simple actions just now made them feel extremely pressured. That person was at least at the third realm. They were no match for him. A follower's face turned green as he said angrily, "Why did you hit him for no reason?" "Li Mu, who asked him to glare at me just now?" The other person found it hard to understand his logic. "You hit him just because he glared at you?" Li Mu asked. "Half a month ago, wasn't there someone who was beaten up by you just because he blocked his way?" The attendant pointed at Li Mu, speechless for a moment. The young master dared to do this because his father was the director of the Ministry of Justice. Did this insignificant constable have a father who was also a director of the Ministry of Justice? They might not be able to beat him, but they did not dare to either. The attendant said sternly, "As a constable, you hit someone for no reason. Come with us to the Ministry of Justice for trial." They did not dare to attack and arrest people on the streets of Luoyang. However, it was different at the Ministry of Justice. The young master's father was the director of the Ministry of Justice. Even when they were in the wrong, he could let them off the hook. Moreover, they were in the right this time. "Fine." Li Mu sheathed his sword and swaggered towards the Ministry of Justice. The attendant looked at Xianxia and asked, "Young master, are you all right?" He had just returned to Luoyang and was punched by someone. Xianxia covered his eyes and said with a dark expression, "Return to the Ministry of Justice." A few attendants followed behind Li Mu. Coupled with Li Mu's constable attire, those who did not know would think that they were the ones who had committed the crime. At this moment, they realized that this person was probably the constable of Luoyang who had made Wei Peng suffer. If he could make Wei Peng suffer in the Ministry of Justice, it meant that he was quite capable. However, their young master was different from Wei Peng. Their young master was the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice. Going to the Ministry of Justice was like going home. How could he be bullied in the Ministry of Justice? Wei Peng followed behind Li Mu and glared at him fiercely. His attendants also looked fierce as if they could already see what would happen to him. Ministry of Justice. The director of the Ministry of Justice was drinking tea in the side hall. He had yet to calm down. As the director of the Ministry of Justice, it was a great humiliation for him to be played by a lowly bailiff in his territory. Whenever he heard Li Mu's name he would have a headache. Why was there such a lunatic in Luoyang? Soon a constable came to report that Li Mu was here again. The director of the Ministry of Justice was stunned. He put down his teacup and said angrily, "He only left a few hours ago. Why is he here again?" He knew that Li Mu had come to the Ministry of Justice without fear. If he went out he would be angered. He waved his hand and said, "Tell him that I'm not here. Tell him to return to his yamen." The constable said helplessly, "But he hit young master this time." "What?" The director of the Ministry of Justice stood up abruptly and ran to the front hall. When he saw his son standing there with one of his eyes bruised, he could no longer hold back his anger. He pointed at Li Mu and shouted, "Li, what the hell do you want to do?" Li Mu sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Sir Director. Sometimes I can't control my temper. You can punish me however you want." "I deserve this." Xianxia covered his eye and said loudly, "Father, flog him 20 times and lock him up for 7 days." Li Mu couldn't help but look at him. As expected of the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice, he was clearly familiar with the laws of the Great Zhou. The director of the Ministry of Justice looked at Li Mu and said with a gloomy face, "In one day, you've provoked trouble twice. As a constable you knowingly broke the law. Your crime is even worse. I'm not going overboard with flogging you 20 times, right?" "It's not." Li Mu took out 2 pieces of silver and said, "These are 2 taels of silver. Sir, please keep them well." The director of the Ministry of Justice's eyelids twitched. He said, "You've already used silver to pay for your crime today." Li Mu smiled and said, "The laws of the Great Zhou don't stipulate that I can only pay for my crime once a day. Could it be that Sir Director wants to abuse your power for personal gain because it's your son who's involved in the case?" The director of the Ministry of Justice's eyelids twitched wildly. The anger in his heart could no longer be suppressed. He had never thought of himself as a good person. But today in front of Li Mu he finally understood what the true power of evil was. Using the law to repeatedly trample on justice made people want to grind his bones and scatter his ashes. He glared at Li Mu and said through gritted teeth, "Do you really think that you can do whatever you want with money? I've already paid my fine. I'll go back first." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "If nothing unexpected happens we'll meet again." When he reached the door he turned back and said with a smile, "I'm sorry. You really can do whatever you want with money. Haven't you always been like this?" Xianxia pointed at Li Mu's departing figure and asked, "Father, are you just going to let him go like this?" The director of the Ministry of Justice took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The law is like this. What can I do?" Xiaxia's chest heaved up and down. He said angrily, "What bullshit law?" Li Mu, who was about to walk out of the Ministry of Justice, paused his steps. Seeing that Li Mu was about to step out of the yamen, the director of the Ministry of Justice slapped his son's mouth and said angrily, "Shut up. This law was set by the previous emperor. Who are you to question it?" Li Mu sighed and walked out of the Ministry of Justice. Xianxia covered his face with an innocent expression. He had clearly done nothing. He had been punched on the street for no reason. When he returned to the Ministry of Justice the person who hit him had left and he had been slapped again. At this moment, the grievance in his heart could no longer be described with words. The director of the Ministry of Justice's chest heaved up and down. He clenched his fists and loosened them after a while. The law of paying in lieu of punishment was very convenient when he used it normally. When those officials or children of the rich and powerful committed crimes he could not really punish them. Using silver in lieu of punishment was a very good way to avoid this trouble. There were clear laws and regulations. Even the victims had nothing to say. However, when these things happened to them the feeling was completely different. This was the source of the feeling in his heart that something was wrong. The rules that were originally set for them were used by Li Mu as a tool. If it was someone else he would not need to talk about rules with them. However, Li Mu had the internal guards behind him. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only act within the rules unless they set up new rules. He returned to the side hall and thought about this matter. After a while another bailiff knocked on the door and came in. The bailiff looked at him with a dazed expression and said, "Sir, the grandson of the minister of Taichung Temple was beaten on the street." The one who hit him was that Li Mu. From the time Li Mu left the Ministry of Justice to the time the grandson of the minister of Taichung Temple was beaten and reported to the Ministry of Justice, only half an hour had passed. The director of the Ministry of Justice held his face with both hands and muttered, "Is he crazy? Beating the son of the director of the Ministry of Rights, the son of the Minister of Revenue, the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice, and the grandson of the minister of Taichung Temple. Only a lunatic would do such a thing." At a certain moment, a light flashed through the director of the Ministry of Justice's mind. The director of the Ministry of Rights, the Minister of Revenue, the Minister of Taichung Temple, and himself were all strongly against abolishing the act of substitution. However, Li Mu used the act of substitution to make them suffer unspeakable. Could it be that his true purpose was to abolish the act of substitution? However, he was only a lowly bailiff. What good would it do him to abolish the act of substitution? No, the first person to propose abolishing the act of substitution was the commandant of Xingdu. Li Mu was the commandant of Xingdu. Could it be that the commandant of Xingdu was behind all this? His purpose was to abolish the act of substitution so that he could perform a meritorious service to His Majesty? The director of the Ministry of Justice had a look of realization. He finally realized the truth. In the Xingdu Yamen, Zhang Chun sneezed. He picked up his teacup and took a sip. Looking at the cramped room, he sighed and said, "Why hasn't His Majesty delivered the house that he promised?" Chapter 217. Li Mu walked on the streets of Luoyang with Wang Wu following behind him. Letting Xiao Bai see him beating people up for no reason would hurt his upright image in Xiao Bai's heart. That was why Li Mu had her stay at the Yamen to cultivate instead of following him around. Wang Wu followed behind Li Mu with a look of reverence. In the past few days he was completely convinced by this new constable. Upholding justice for the people, punishing evil and upholding justice. This was the constable of the people. The sons of some officials in Luoyang were evil, but he was even more evil than them. He went to the Ministry of Justice as if he was drinking water and eating. He had beaten people up, but in the end he could walk out of the Ministry of Justice unscathed. Who else in Luoyang could be like him? "Constable Li, would you like a bowl of noodles?" "Constable Li, would you like a pear? There are 2 new girls in the brothel. Would you like to come and have some fun?" In the past few days, Li Mu's name had spread throughout Luoyang. It was not because he was upholding justice for the people, nor was it because he was handsome. It was because he could walk out of the Ministry of Justice unscathed after beating up the sons of officials on the streets. This gave the people a lot of fun to watch. The people whom the constable of the Luoyang Yamen had attacked were all sons of officials who were used to being arrogant and despotic in the Luoyang. Seeing them being bullied and unable to do anything to Constable Li, the commoners were extremely pleased. Li Mu rejected the brothel madam's invitation. He looked ahead, searching for his next prey. At one point his eyes lit up as a familiar figure came into view. It was Zhu Xian, the son of the director of the Ministry of Rights. Li Mu had only been in Luoyang for 2 days, but he already had a grudge with him because of the horse-riding incident on the streets. Zhu Xian had been beaten a few times in the Ministry of Justice, but he had completely recovered in a few days. Wei Peng, who had been beaten the most, had probably recovered by now. Being beaten with a cane might take the life of an ordinary person, but these people were rich and definitely did not lack healing pills. At most they would suffer some physical pain during the torture. Zhu Xian had already seen Li Mu, but he didn't dare to look at him again. Over the past few days he had investigated thoroughly. Li Mu had internal guards behind him. They were the Empress's lackeys and fangs. Although there were many people in Luoyang who could afford to offend him, it definitely did not include him, whose father was only a director of the Ministry of Rights. He simply turned around, planning to slip away as soon as possible. As soon as Zhu Xian turned around, Li Mu appeared in front of him. Li Mu looked at Zhu Xian and asked with a smile, "Isn't this young Master Zhu? Where are you going in such a hurry?" Zhu Xian lowered his head, not daring to look at Li Mu. He said, "Just strolling around." Li Mu frowned and said, "Why don't you look at me when you speak? Are you looking down on me?" Zhu Xian immediately raised his head and said with a sad face, "Arrest her, Li, it was all my fault. I was blind. I shouldn't have ridden on the street and provoked the imperial court. I won't do it again. Please forgive me." Li Mu looked at Zhu Xian, stunned for a moment. If Zhu Xian was as arrogant and despotic as before, beating him up would not be a big deal. But he suddenly turned over a new leaf and admitted his mistake. If Li Mu beat him up again, he would be in the wrong. A prodigal who turned over a new leaf was more precious than gold. If he could really repent in the future, he would be spared a beating today. Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Behave yourself in the future." "Let's go, thank you, Arrestor Li." Zhu Xian did not hesitate and quickly left. Li Mu sighed regretfully and continued to search for his next target. Suddenly, the sound of hurried horse hooves came from behind. Li Mu looked ahead and saw a young master riding on a horse. He crossed the road, causing the people to run away in panic. Riding on horses on the streets of Luoyang was common, but it was not so common. This was the second time Li Mu had seen it. He was about to chase after the young master when he felt something on his leg. He looked down and saw Wang Mu hugging his leg tightly. Li Mu asked, "What are you doing?" Wang Mu said bitterly, "Boss, we can't go. We can't afford to offend this person." Given Wang Mu's eyesight after following Li Mu for the past few days, he should already know who they could afford to offend and who they could not. Even in such a situation, Li Mu was still so determined to drag Li Mu along. This showed that this person's background was indeed not small. Li Mu asked, "Who is he?" Wang Mu said, "A disciple of the Zhou family." A disciple of the Zhou family. Although there were only 4 words, it was very important in the hearts of the people, officials and nobles in Luoyang. Although the royal family had no relatives and since the empress ascended the throne, the relationship with the Zhou family was not as close as before. But now the Zhou family was undoubtedly the #1 family in Great Zhou. The Zhou family and their vassal forces controlled half of the imperial court. The Zhou family's ancestor was a peak 6th realm cultivator. The family recruited countless cultivators including Zhou Xian. In Luoyang, even the Xiao family was inferior to the Zhou family. Lord Zhang had once warned Li Mu that the Zhou family was first among the people and forces that he could not afford to offend in Luoyang. Even if Li Mu had internal guards behind him, he could not afford to offend this family. Wang Mu hugged Li Mu's leg tightly and said, "Boss, listen to me. This is really not something we can afford to offend." Li Mu knew very well that he could be arrogant in front of the sons and grandsons of rank 5 and 6 officials in the name of internal guards. But he did not have the right to be arrogant in front of these people. In the end, before he had absolute strength and power, he was just someone who bullied the weak and feared the strong. He walked a few steps and soon saw his next target. It was a young man dressed in luxurious clothes. He seemed to have drunk a lot and walked on the street drunk. Occasionally he would smile at the girls passing by, causing them to cry out in surprise and hurriedly move away. An old man was following behind him at a distance that was neither too far nor too close. He should be a bodyguard. Wang Wu followed Li Mu's gaze. His hands, which had already let go of Li Mu's thighs, hugged him again. He said helplessly, "Lord, this is also not something we can afford to offend." Unlike riding a horse on the street, being drunk was not a crime. Smiling at women while drunk was not a crime. If it was not for the fact that he was usually arrogant and domineering in Luoyang and bullied the people, Li Mu would not have taken the initiative to offend him. He was just curious about the background of this young man who had a 5th realm guard. He looked at Wang Mu and asked, "Who is this?" Wang Mu said, "Crown Prince Ping, the former Crown Prince's cousin. He's from the Xiao royal family." The former Crown Prince usually referred to the previous emperor of the Great Zhou. However, he had only been on the throne for less than a month before he died. The people and officials of Luoyang did not call him the former emperor. According to Lord Zhang's reminder to Li Mu, the Xiao royal family was ranked 2nd, just below the Zhou family. The Great Zhou court had been swayed by these 2 forces since 3 years ago. The Xiao royal family wanted to regain the emperor's aura after the empress abdicated and return the power of Great Zhou to the right track. The Zhou family wanted the empress to pass the throne to the Zhou family's descendants and change the surname of the Great Zhou royal family. These 2 forces had an irreconcilable fundamental conflict. Among the various forces in Luoyang, some leaned toward the Xiao family, some leaned toward the Zhou family, some leaned toward the empress and some remained neutral. Even though the Zhou family and the Xiao family were locked in a fierce battle in court, they would try their best to avoid offending each other outside of court. Some people could not be offended for the time being. Those who could be offended had been in seclusion for the past 2 days. Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Let's return to the court." Ministry of Justice. Several officials gathered together. The atmosphere was rather gloomy. Preposterous. Too arrogant. Lawless. Simply lawless. The director of the Ministry of Justice looked at the furious director of the Ministry of Rights, the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, the minister of Taichung Temple and a few other officials. He rubbed the space between his eyebrows but did not speak. His son had been beaten 100 times and had not fully recovered even now. His concubine had been causing trouble at home every day. The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue looked angrily at the director of the Ministry of Justice and asked, "Sir Yang, don't you have a way to deal with that Li Mu? What can I do?" The director of the Ministry of Justice had been extremely irritated these past 2 days. Seeing that the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue was vaguely blaming him, he said impatiently, "The Ministry of Justice is the Ministry of Justice of the Great Show, not my Ministry of Justice. When the officials of the Ministry of Justice do things, they have to abide by the law. Although that Li Mu is arrogant, everything he does is within the law. What do you want me to do?" The director of the Ministry of Rights said, "Is there really no way at all?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said angrily, "That brat is more cunning than a fox. He is more familiar with the laws of the Great Show than I am. He also has the internal guards behind him. Unless the silver is abolished, no one can deal with him." Everyone looked at each other. They could all see a strong sense of helplessness in each other's eyes. In the past, when their children got into trouble, they were the ones who were in the wrong. They thought about how to use the Ministry of Justice to turn big problems into small ones and small ones into nothing. But these past few days, the ones who were bullied were them. They were clearly officials of the imperial court. Their children were bullied, but they could not use the law to punish the culprit. The feeling of not being able to use the law to punish the culprit made them extremely depressed. The minister of Taichung Temple asked, "Is there no other way besides abolishing the silver?" The director of the Ministry of Justice shook his head and said, "No. Changing the law had always been the responsibility of the Ministry of Justice." The minister of Taichung Temple asked again, "What did the minister and the minister say?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said, "The two of them are busy every day. Why would they care about such a small matter?" To them, the matter of paying for the crime was a big matter. However, to the assistant minister and the minister, helping the Shao royal family regain their power was the most important thing. An insignificant change to a law was simply not worthy of their special attention. The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue gritted his teeth and said, "They must be doing this to abolish the silver law." Those who opposed the abolition of the law in the imperial court that day all suffered such revenge. The director of the Ministry of Rights asked, "Who was the one who sent the letter proposing the abolition of the silver law?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said, "The commandant of the divine capital, Zhang Xian." The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue suddenly slammed the table and said angrily, "That damned Zhang Xian. He actually set up such a trap for us. I will never forgive him." Chapter 218. At the censorate. Lawless. This is lawless. Is no one going to do anything about such an evil official in the divine capital? Imperial censors, are you going to watch the divine capital be turned into a mess by this person? The officials whose families' juniors had been bullied gathered at the entrance of the censorate to block the entrance of the censorate. The censorate's door was shut tight and did not let them in. After shouting at the door for a while, and censorate poked his head out of the wall and said to them, "Dear censorates, this is the Ministry of Justice's matter. You should go to the Ministry of Justice's yamen." An official said angrily, "The Ministry of Justice told us to look for you, but you're looking for the Ministry of Justice. Who should we look for?" The censorate said, "I'm sorry. The censorate is only in charge of monitoring matters. You should report this to the Ministry of Justice." The official gritted his teeth and said, "Is the censorate not going to report such an evil official?" The censorate on the wall said regretfully, "This person's actions did not violate any law. It's not within the scope of the censorate's impeachment." Then he jumped off the wall and looked at his colleagues in the courtyard. He smiled and said, "I wonder who thought of this idea. It's amazing," one of the censorates mocked. "Now you want us to impeach him." Back in the imperial court, I wonder who was the one who strongly opposed the abolition of the scapegoat silver. Now that it's their turn, why did they change their attitude? Another censorate smiled and said, "This is called shooting yourself in the foot. This Commandant Zhang can even think of such an idea. He's a genius. Many officials in the censorate disliked the scapegoat silver law. Every once in a while the imperial court would discuss the abolition of the scapegoat silver. However, due to the protection of the officials outside, the censorate's suggestion was rejected time and time again. In the end, the officials did not care who made the suggestion. The result was the same anyway. This time many people did not know who submitted the scapegoat silver. However, after the incident in the divine capital, Wei Zhongquan's name was known by everyone. To be able to come up with a method of using violence to curb violence, using evil to curb evil, and making some people who defended the silver law of substitution suffer the consequences of their own actions. Anyone who heard this would have to say that they were impressed. In the current imperial court, there weren't many good officials who were dedicated to the people, dared to fight against evil forces and didn't adhere to the rules. I'm not. I didn't. Don't speak nonsense. Inside the divine capital Yamen, Zhang Chun's face was filled with shock. He shouted, "What does this have to do with me?" Deputy Constable Sun said with a smile, "Sir, you don't have to hide it anymore. Who doesn't know that you were the one who sent the letter proposing the abolition of the substitute silver? You were also the one who instigated Constable Li's actions." Zhang Chun opened his mouth and was speechless for a moment. He was the one who handed the memorial to Li Mu, and Li Mu was his subordinate. It was reasonable for others to have such a guess. But the problem was that he had only handed over the letter to buy a big house for his wife and daughter. He did not instruct Li Mu to do those things. In the end, not only did he not get the house but he also became a scapegoat. This was purely a case of yellow mud falling into one's crotch. He couldn't explain it even if he wanted to. When he thought about how he had unknowingly offended so many officials and dignitaries, Zhang Chun was furious. He said angrily, "Go and find Li Mu for me." After a while, Li Mu came to the back of the yamen. Zhang Chun gritted his teeth and said, "Look at what you've done." Li Mu was worried about not being able to find the target. He came back to his senses and asked, "What's the matter?" Zhang Chun said angrily, "You're still playing dumb with me. They all think that I'm the one who instigated you to do this." What? Li Mu was shocked. He had worked hard to find the target and repeatedly used violence. He didn't hesitate to destroy the perfect image in Xiao Bai's mind. All this was to establish an image in the eyes of the people as a constable who didn't fear the strong and dared to fight against evil forces for the sake of the people's well-being. In this matter he was definitely the number one person. When this matter was settled, all of the people's psychokinesis would be targeted at him. He was the one who did all the dirty work. Lord Zhang was just drinking tea in the yamen and took away the fruits of his labor. He was demoted from the number one person to the number two person. Was there any justice in this world? He stole the fruits of Li Mu's victory without much effort and gained the love and respect of the people. How could he be blamed for it? Zhang Chun was stunned when he saw the change in his expression. He asked, "You're still not willing to let me take the blame for you?" Li Mu said indignantly, "I worked hard to go against those officials and took the risk of being beaten and imprisoned in order to obtain psychokinesis from the people. Lord Zhang obtained all of this just by drinking tea in the yamen. You're still not willing?" The two of them looked at each other and saw the indignation in each other's eyes. Li Mu didn't expect that he would suffer retribution so soon after stealing Lord Zhang's psychokinesis. Zhang Chun also didn't expect that he would offend so many officials in Luoyang just because he wanted to move to another residence. He had to bear a burden that his life couldn't bear. Li Mu sighed in the end. He was just a small constable. Even if he wanted to take the blame, he didn't have the right to do so. Zhang Chun also sighed. He didn't want to offend people or cause trouble, but the people he offended this time were more than the people he had offended in his 10 years as an official. In the Ministry of Justice, the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, the Minister of the Ministry of Rights, the Minister of the Ministry of Justice, the Minister of the Taichung Temple and the others also sighed. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue said unwillingly, "Is there really no other way?" The Minister of the Ministry of Justice said, "There's no other way except to amend the law and abolish the Silver of Guilt." In the past, the Silver of Guilt Act was their umbrella of protection. Now the Silver of Guilt Act was their death warrant. With Li Mu's arrogance, if this law wasn't abolished, their families' juniors wouldn't be able to leave their homes in the future. If they were caught by Li Mu outside, they would inevitably be beaten up. Unless they could hire a fourth realm cultivator to guard them at all times, but the price they had to pay was too great. How could they afford to hire a middle realm cultivator? Li Mu and Zhang Chun's goal was clear. If the Silver of Guilt Act wasn't abolished, his actions wouldn't stop. The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue suddenly said, "Can you add a restriction to this law? For example, if you want to use the Silver of Guilt Act, you must be an official." The minister of the Ministry of Justice shook his head and said, "That's impossible. This will destroy the foundation of the people's hearts in great show. Her Majesty won't agree, and most of the court officials won't agree either." Although the old party and the new party argued endlessly in the court, there were only disagreements over the succession of imperial power. Neither the new party nor the old party wanted to completely destroy the foundation of the people's hearts in great show. No one was willing to take over a great show whose foundation was destroyed. Of course, Her Majesty the Empress wouldn't agree to such a ridiculous thing for the sake of the people's hearts. Abandoning the idea of restricting the Silver of Guilt Act, the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue thought of his son who was still lying in bed at home and sighed. He raised his head to look at everyone and asked tentatively, "Why don't we abolish it?" The minister of the Ministry of Rights thought for a moment and nodded. "I agree. This can't go on." The minister of the Taichung Temple thought of his precious grandson's bruised eyes. After thinking for a moment, he also sighed and said, "In any case, this law is useless to us. If we don't abolish it, it will only become something that Li Mu can rely on. It's extremely disadvantageous for us." Chapter 219. Half a month ago, the Silver Law of Substitution was still a protective umbrella for the powerful and influential officials in Luoyang. Ever since Li Mu came to Luoyang, he put away the umbrella and used it as a weapon to whip them. The longer this law existed, the longer they would be threatened by Li Mu. After some discussion, they finally decided to abolish this law. Since this law could no longer be used by them, it could not be used by that damned Li Mu either. All along, those who opposed the abolition of the Silver Law of Substitution were here. As long as they all agreed to abolish this law, there would be no more resistance. The Ministry of Justice had always been in charge of making and changing criminal laws. The Minister of Justice said, "I need to ask the two of you about this." At the back office of the Ministry of Justice, the Minister of Justice asked, "You want to abolish the Silver Law of Substitution?" The Minister of Justice nodded and said, "The arrestor of Luoyang was ordered by the Commandant of Luoyang to do whatever he wanted with the Silver Law of Substitution. He made Luoyang a mess. If this law is not abolished, the Ministry of Justice will become a joke in Luoyang." The Minister of Justice did not have a son. He did not care whether the Silver Law of Substitution was abolished or not. He looked at the other person beside him and asked, "Assistant Minister Zhou, what do you think?" The Assistant Minister of Justice did not even raise his head and said, "It's a small matter. Let them decide." The Minister of Justice suddenly thought of something and said, "Assistant Minister Zhou, didn't you also advocate for reform and abolish the Silver Law of Substitution?" The Assistant Minister of Justice raised his head and said, "Yes, I was young and fearless. I always wanted to do something for the court. Unfortunately, I was not as lucky as this arrestor," the Minister of Justice said. His fearlessness is quite similar to Assistant Minister Zhou in the past. But it's good that this law is abolished. At least Luoyang will be less chaotic. The Minister of Justice just smiled and said, "The chaotic atmosphere in Luoyang is not just because of the Silver Law of Substitution. I really want to see how far he can go." With the permission of the two officials, the Minister of Justice returned to his room on duty and began to think about abolishing the Silver Law of Substitution. He had no choice but to make this decision. He felt very depressed, but there was nothing he could do. Li Mu had taken their path, leaving them with no other path to take, so they could only destroy it. 2 days later, Ziwei Hall. When the director of the Ministry of Justice brought up the memorial from the Shindu military captain Zhang Chun again, his attitude changed. He actually supported the idea of the court abolishing the use of silver in lieu of punishment and changing it to a combination of silver and punishment. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, the Director of the Ministry of Rights, and the Minister of Taichung Temple all stood out to support this idea. This action caused some of the people in the imperial court to drop their jaws. Every time someone brought up the idea of abolishing the punishment silver, these officials, led by the Director of the Ministry of Justice, would stand out to oppose it. Just half a month ago they had righteously refuted the abolition of the substitutes in silver. How could they change their minds one after another after only half a month? Of course, There were also a portion of people who knew exactly what had happened in the past half a month. It was because these people supported the substitution silver method that their children were forced to hide at home by the constable of the Luoyang Yamen. This matter had become a joke in the Luoyang Yamen. These people had picked up a rock, but in the end they had only smashed their own feet. In the hall, an imperial censor stood out and asked the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue, "Lord Wei, didn't you say before that the substitute sin silver is an important source of income for the national treasury every year? The repair costs of the royal palace, the salaries of the officials and the disaster relief funds for the various counties all come from here? Without the substitute sin silver, where will all this money come from?" Anyone could hear the mockery in the censor's words. The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Revenue said without blushing or skipping a beat, "Although the substitute sin silver has been abolished, in the future if you break the law, you will be punished both with silver and punishment. Moreover, the amount of punishment will be higher than before. The worry of the Ministry of Revenue's income decreasing can be resolved." The censor then looked at the director of the Ministry of Rights and asked, "The substitute sin silver system was established when the previous emperor was still alive. If it is so easily overturned, is it not disrespectful to the previous emperor?" This was what he had said in the court half a month ago. The director of the Ministry of Rights blushed but quickly recovered. He said, "That was then and this is now. The court situation during the previous emperor's time is very different from now. We officials in the court cannot stick to the old ways. We must know how to be flexible. Only then can we better assist His Majesty in governing the country." The censor gave him a disdainful look but did not say anything else. After all, the abolition of the substitute sin silver was beneficial to the people. A few words of mockery were enough. If they were forced into a corner, it might backfire. Behind the curtain, the young female official slowly said, "Does anyone have any objections to the abolition of the substitute sin silver?" There was complete silence in the hall. Even the officials who usually opposed the law had turned to support the abolition. Even if the others did not want to, they would not stand out and express their selfishness. After a moment, the young female official said, "Since no one objects, the Ministry of Justice will immediately abolish the law. From now on, anyone who breaks the law will not be able to use silver as a substitute." Luoyang Yamen. Mr. Mei held the imperial edict in his hand and read it aloud. "Zhang Chun, the military captain of Luoyang, diligent and loyal to the people. He will be granted an official residence and become the minister of Luoyang." Zhang Chun smiled and took the imperial edict with both hands. He bowed and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Li Mu stood aside and sighed to himself. He hated the fact that he had been working for others for years. He was the one who was busy outside. He was the one who was hated by the sons of officials. He was the one who had been in and out of the Ministry of Justice 7 times. In the end, Lord Zhang was the one who got the residence and was promoted by half a rank. Li Mu had worked hard for half a month and worked for him for nothing. After Mr. Mei finished reading the imperial edict, he walked to Li Mu and asked, "How much did you spend these days? I will report it to you when I return to the palace." Li Mu said, 30 taels. Mr. Mei raised his eyebrows and said in surprise, 30 taels? He was not surprised that Li Mu had spent too much but that it was too little. The abolition of the substitute silver would benefit the present generation and the future generations. Many knowledgeable officials wanted to abolish the law, but they all failed in the end. It was obvious how difficult it was to do it. She was prepared to spend 3,000 or even 30,000 taels. She did not expect Li Mu to spend 30 taels. Li Mu nodded and repeated, "It was 30 taels. Most of it was spent in the Ministry of Justice. If it was not for the meal at the fragrance restaurant, 20 taels would have been enough. The most effective way to deal with evil people was to be even more evil than them. If you wanted to force the Ministry of Justice to submit, then you had to go their way and leave them with no way out. As long as you found the right way, the money was secondary." In the imperial garden of the palace, the empress was admiring a budding peony among the flowers. She said softly, 30 taels? Official Mei bowed slightly and stood behind her. He smiled and said, "In the past half a month he has used the silver law of guilt substitution to its maximum. He only used 20 taels to beat up the sons of the officials from the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Justice. If that wasn't the case, why would those officials take the initiative to change the law?" The young female official beside her said, "After Her Majesty abolished the substitute silver law, the people of Fairy's capital responded very strongly. Everyone in Fairy's capital went to the state temple to pray. The Empress looked away from the flower bud and said calmly, "Let's go out and have a look." She turned around and brushed the flower bud with her sleeve. In an instant, the peonies in the garden bloomed. On the streets of Fairy's capital, Li Mu and Wang Wu walked on the streets. There were not many people on the streets that used to be bustling today. At this time, most of the people in Fairy's capital went to the state temple to pray. The substitute silver law had tortured the people for more than a decade since the time of the previous emperor. Today it was finally abolished. The people of Fairy's capital were grateful for Her Majesty's benevolence and went to the state temple to pray. This caused the idea of getting some telekinesis from the people to fail. However, although most of Li Mu's gains were stolen by Lord Li Mu because of the abolition of the substitute silver law, it was only for the imperial court. The people's trust in Li Mu would not decrease. This was all because of his punches on the streets of Fairy's capital. From afar, Li Mu saw a group of people coming from afar. They were all familiar faces to Li Mu. There was Wei Peng, the son of the vice director of the Ministry of Revenue, Zhou Xian, the son of the director of the Ministry of Rights, Xianxia, the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice, and the grandson of the minister of Taichung Temple. For the past few days, Li Mu had been waiting for them on the street for a long time, but they refused to come out. Now that he finally saw them, he couldn't beat them up for no reason because the silver art of crime substitution had been abolished. When they saw Li Mu, their first reaction was to turn and run. Later they realized that the substitute silver law was abolished. What was there to be afraid of? They strode forward and focused their eyes on Li Mu. They were full of anger. Wei Peng suffered the most from Li Mu. His eyes were the fiercest, as if he wanted to eat him alive. Even though the bailiffs from the Ministry of Justice didn't hit him hard, he was still bedridden at home for nearly half a month. During this period, there wasn't a moment when he didn't think about taking revenge on Li Mu and washing away the humiliation he suffered that day. Li Mu glanced at him and said angrily, "What are you looking at?" Wei Peng smiled coldly and said, "What's wrong with looking at you?" Li Mu could not do anything to him. After all, the substitute silver law was changed. He had no reason to beat Wei Peng up. Not only did he have to be beaten up, but he also had to be fined a large sum of money. Seeing Li Mu standing there, Wei Peng twitched the corner of his mouth and asked, "What's wrong? Are you scared?" "This is not like you, Constable Li." Li Mu looked at him and said, "I'm warning you. Don't be too arrogant." Wei Peng mocked. "Being arrogant doesn't violate the law. Why don't you hit me?" Seeing that Li Mu still did not do anything, the mocking expression on his face became more obvious. He arrogantly moved closer to Li Mu's ear and said in a low voice, "Our matter is not over yet." Li Mu picked his ear and said, "What did you say? Speak louder. I can't hear you." Wei Peng raised his voice and said, "Our matter is not over yet." Li Mu looked at him and asked, "Are you threatening me?" Wei Peng laughed coldly and said, "So what if I'm threatening you? Is it against the law?" Everyone had mocking expressions. Only Xianxia, the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice, was stunned in place. In the next moment he said in shock, "Wei Peng, shut up." As the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice, he had a much deeper understanding of the laws of the Great Zhou than Wei Peng and the others. Using words or violence to threaten and intimidate an official of the imperial court was truly against the law. If the circumstances were minor, they would be detained for 5 days or less. If the circumstances were serious, they would be detained for 5 days or less and be fined money. Xianxia wanted to remind Wei Peng, but it was already too late. "You don't know, right? Threatening me is really against the law." Li Mu looked at Wei Peng and shook his head. "Let's go and sit in the yamen. In the future, remember to read more books. There's no harm." Chapter 220. Wei Peng and the other officials' ignorance of the law was outrageous. According to the laws of Great Zhou, threatening, insulting and slandering others were not serious crimes. However, if they caused a certain degree of harm to the person involved, they would still be fined and imprisoned. Officials and bailiffs were all government officials. Threatening a government official was an additional crime. Li Mu had kindly taught Wei Peng this law. Wei Peng was still in disbelief. He looked at Xianxia and asked, "Is what he said true?" Xianxia nodded helplessly and said, "It's true." Wei Peng's face paled. He squeezed out a smile and said, "I was just joking." Li Mu's face darkened. He said, "Do I look like I'm joking with you?" Wei Ping turned and ran without hesitation. Just as he was about to leave, Xianxia grabbed his arm tightly. Wei Ping turned around and said angrily, "What are you doing?" Xianxia gritted his teeth and said, "You idiot. You can only be detained for 5 days if you threaten a government official. Resisting arrest and running away is not a matter of 5 days." Li Mu looked at him again. As expected of the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice. His awareness of the law was much stronger than Wei Ping's. Wei Ping stood there in a daze. His face was full of regret. Li Mu glanced at him and said, "What are you standing there for? Let's go." He held Wei Ping's arm behind his back and walked toward the Luoyang Yamen. Yang Xiu looked at Zhu Xian and said, "Isn't Minister Counselor Jing of the Ministry of Rights also the Minister of Luoyang? Go and invite him. Maybe Wei Ping won't have to go to jail." Zhu Xian shook his head and said, "It's no use. His Majesty just decreed that the Minister of Luoyang will be promoted to the Minister of Luoyang. Minister Counselor Jing will no longer be the Minister of Luoyang." Yang Xiu sighed and said, "Then there's nothing we can do." A moment later, in the prison of the Luoyang Yamen, Wei Ping sat in the prison. His face was extremely pale. No one knew whether it was because of fear or anger. Yang Xiu looked at Wei Ping in the cell and said, "There's no other way. You caused trouble first. My father can't save you. I can only wrong you to stay here for a few days. If you need anything, I'll buy it for you." Wei Ping gritted his teeth and said, "I want a copy of The Law of Great Zhou." When Li Mu and Wang Wu walked on the streets again, the number of commoners on the streets had increased. He had only been in Fairy's capital for a month, but the feeling he got when he stood on the streets of Fairy's capital was completely different from before. When he first came to Luoyang, the people he met on this street did not help the elderly when they fell, nor did they help when they encountered injustice. Their gazes were indifferent and their expressions were numb. They were very wary of each other. Now Li Mu could no longer see much indifference and numbness on their faces. On the surface, the abolition of the silver of guilt law placed the officials and nobles of the divine capital on the same level as the common people. This was the first time in more than a decade that the people of the divine capital were united like never before. This was naturally beneficial to maintaining the stability of the country. It was also beneficial to Li Mu. Although he was not well known in Fairy's capital, there were still many people who could recognize him when he walked on the streets. As Li Mu walked, a steady stream of psyche power gathered on his body. If he did a few more good deeds that pleased the people, their trust in him would gradually turn into love and respect. This would allow his 7 emotions to be fulfilled. The shopkeeper of the noodle stall poked his head out of the shop and said to Li Mu, "Constable Li, would you like to sit down and have a bowl of noodles?" It was mealtime. This noodle stall was very tasty. The constables of the Yamen often patronized this stall. Li Mu sat down beside the stall and said, "2 bowls of noodles, please." The shopkeeper quickly brought out 2 bowls of steaming hot noodles from the shop and said, "I knew it. Constable Li must have a reason for beating up those officials' sons. Now that the silver of guilt law has finally been abolished, it's good that it was abolished. In the past, the law didn't even treat us common people as humans. Your arrival in Fairy's capital is truly a blessing for the people. Everyone is very grateful to you." Li Mu put down his chopsticks and said with a smile, "The person you should really be grateful to is Her Majesty. If it wasn't for Her Majesty, the silver of guilt law wouldn't have been abolished." Li Mu knew very well why the officials of the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Justice could tolerate him repeatedly jumping around in front of them. It was because he had the internal guards behind him. Furthermore, the internal guard's protection of Li Mu was ordered by the current empress. Up until now he had not even met the empress. He also didn't know when he would truly be able to ride on her coattails. Compared to the empress, the temptation of a 28-year-old 7th realm powerhouse was even greater for Li Mu. The successive emperors of the Great Zhou had a different cultivation shortcut from any other cultivator. The wisp of emperor's qi nurtured in the imperial ancestral temple could create an upper realm powerhouse for the imperial family. It was precisely because the empress received the recognition of the ancestral temple that she obtained this wisp of emperor's qi that she successfully ascended to the 7th realm. She also had the qualifications to become an emperor. Li Mu, who was eating noodles beside the noodle stall, didn't see the 3 figures standing behind him. It wasn't just him. None of the passers-by on the street saw them. Seeing that there was no one around, the shopkeeper of the noodle stall said, 3 years ago, when Her Majesty just ascended to the throne, there was still a lot of criticism in Fairy's capital. However, everyone has to admit that in these 3 years, everyone's lives have been much better than before. Speaking of which, I've even seen Her Majesty once, Li Mu said in surprise. You've seen Her Majesty? The shopkeeper nodded and said, I've seen her before. However, at that time Her Majesty wasn't Her Majesty, nor was she the crown princess. She even ate noodles at my place. At that time I never would have thought that she would become Her Majesty the Empress. Wang Wu finished his soup and put down the bowl. He said with disdain, Stop bragging. When Her Majesty wasn't the crown princess, she was still the Zhou clan's legitimate daughter. Why would she come here to eat noodles? The shopkeeper glanced at him and said, Believe it or not. After saying that, he went inside to get busy. Wang Wu wiped his mouth and said, This old guy doesn't even blink when he lies. Her Majesty is of noble birth. Why would she come to this kind of place like us? Li Mu didn't know much about the thigh he wanted to hug. His knowledge of the Empress was limited to hearsay. Wang Wu grew up in Fairy's capital and often collected information about the rich and powerful families. Perhaps he knew more than Li Mu. He looked at Wang Wu and asked, How much do you know about Her Majesty? Speaking of this matter, Wang Wu began to talk non-stop. That's a lot. Her Majesty is the youngest daughter of Grand Tutor Zhou. She is devastatingly beautiful and has a very high cultivation talent since she was young. When she was 20 years old, she had already entered the 5th realm. Devastatingly beautiful? Li Mu said suspiciously. Didn't they say that after she married the crown prince he didn't like her? If she's so beautiful, why wouldn't he like her? In Li Mu's subconscious mind, although the Empress' cultivation was high, she shouldn't be that beautiful. Otherwise, why would she still be a virgin when she became the Empress? If it wasn't because she was too ugly, then the rumors were wrong. Wang Wu looked around and said in a low voice, Boss, I don't know. The crown prince likes men. This isn't a secret in Fairy's capital. Li Mu was stunned. He also lowered his voice and gossiped. So the rumors that Her Majesty is still a virgin are true? As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt an inexplicable chill. The hairs on his body stood on end and his entire body shivered. Chapter 221. Behind Li Mu, where no one could see, Mr. Mei looked anxious. The young female official looked angry. Finally, a beautiful woman with a noble temperament glanced at him. The next moment, 3 figures appeared in the imperial garden of the imperial palace. The young female official's face was livid. She said coldly, This person is audacious. How dare he criticize Her Majesty behind her back? I'll put him in the internal guard prison right now. Mr. Mei opened his mouth. He wanted to plead for Li Mu, but he didn't know what to say. Criticizing Her Majesty behind her back was a serious crime if she wanted to punish him. The beautiful woman's expression was calm. She didn't seem angry. She said lightly, Forget it. He just made a great contribution to abolishing the act of substitution. If he is imprisoned, how will he explain it to the people? Since he has contributed to the great show, I'll spare him this time. Since the Empress had spoken, the young female official couldn't say anything else. Mr. Mei breathed a sigh of relief. He said, Your Majesty is merciful. The Empress said, You can leave now. I want to admire the flowers alone. The Empress spoke again. The 2 of them bowed and said, We'll leave now. The 2 of them turned and walked out of the imperial garden. In the imperial garden, the graceful and noble temperament of the beautiful woman was gone. Her pretty face was cold. She stomped her feet and gritted her teeth. I'm so angry. The next moment, her figure disappeared again. Li Mu returned to the yamen and went home with Xiao Bai. There were many versions of the gossip about the Empress in Luoyang. However, she lived in the depths of the imperial palace for a long time. Even when she went to court, there would be a curtain blocking her. Even the ministers of the court had never seen her face. Therefore, Li Mu had no way of knowing whether she was tall or short, fat or thin, beautiful or ugly. However, Li Mu didn't care about that. As long as she had money and power and could provide him with cultivation resources, it was fine. When he returned home, Li Mu checked the formation he had set up. He didn't find any signs of it being invaded. He had offended too many people this time around. Just in case, it was better for him to find some time to buy some materials to reinforce the formation and raise its prowess to another level. After all, the divine capital wasn't like the North County. A Zhou Xian cultivator was already considered a strong cultivator in the North County, but in the divine capital he was just an ordinary follower of the officials. Only in the middle realm would the situation improve. There were still very few cultivators in the 6th realm. At this level, breaking through to the upper 3 realms was often the only goal they pursued. It was very difficult for the imperial court to use them. The 5th realm was the cornerstone of the imperial court, but they were not people that the minor officials Li Mu had offended could order about. He only needed to increase the power of the formation by 1 level so that it could trap a 4th level cultivator. As Li Mu was thinking this, he suddenly tripped and lost his balance, falling to the ground. Xiao Bai froze for a moment, then immediately ran over and helped Li Mu up. Li Mu patted the dust off his clothes and looked back. The place he had just walked through was flat and there were no potholes. How did he trip? After cultivating for so long, Li Mu's agility and reflexes were dozens of times higher than before, but he didn't react at all just now. He scratched his head in bewilderment and continued to walk forward. Bang! After 2 steps, Li Mu tripped again and almost fell. If it wasn't for his quick reflexes, he would have fallen flat on his face like before. He opened his heavenly eye and looked around vigilantly. He didn't find anything unusual. It was still the same after he used his heavenly eye. From the beginning to the end, the corpse dog's soul didn't show any signs of alertness. This meant that his body didn't feel any danger. Li Mu looked around and started to doubt himself. Did something go wrong with his cultivation? Did his limbs become uncoordinated and he couldn't even walk? After tripping twice, Xiao Bai took the initiative to support Li Mu so that he wouldn't trip again. This time they returned home smoothly. Li Mu returned to his room and sat cross-legged on the bed. He held 2 pieces of spiritual jade and cultivated. Under the stimulation of his psyche power, the spiritual energy in the spiritual jade was absorbed by him at an incredible speed. Xiao Bai also sat cross-legged opposite Li Mu and focused on cultivating. After absorbing the 2 pieces of spiritual jade, Li Mu's consciousness entered the flask heaven space again. He found that there were no more spiritual jades in it. The spiritual jades that he had snatched from the county government last time were mostly distributed to Lu Hanyan, Wanwan and Xiao Bai. He had used up all the remaining spiritual jades during this time. Looking out the window, Li Mu found that it was already late. He lay down and prepared to sleep. Xiao Bai crawled over from the end of the bed and lay down quietly beside Li Mu. Li Mu closed his eyes and his breathing quickly became steady and long. In his sleep, a thick white fog suddenly appeared in front of Li Mu's eyes. A dream. Li Mu stood in the white fog and clearly realized this. A cultivator refined his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. His consciousness and body were all under his control. It had been a long time since he dreamt of his own accord. The fog in front of him surged. Li Mu saw a pavilion appear in the fog. There seemed to be a figure in the pavilion. He slowly walked towards the pavilion. Dreams reflected one's subconscious. Li Mu was very curious about what was in his subconscious. When he approached the pavilion, he could vaguely see the figure in the pavilion. It seemed to be a woman. However, Li Mu couldn't see clearly because of the fog. As Li Mu approached, the woman in the fog in the pavilion slowly turned her head. Li Mu thought that he would see Lu Hanyan, Li Qing or Wanwan in his dream. However, when the woman turned around, Li Mu saw an unfamiliar woman. The woman had black hair that cascaded down like a waterfall. She had willowy eyebrows and watery eyes. She exuded a holy and noble aura. She was extremely beautiful and didn't pale in comparison to Xiao Bai. Facing Xiao Bai every day, Li Mu wasn't that surprised by her beauty. He was just a little puzzled. Why would an unfamiliar woman appear in his dream? Could it be that he subconsciously wanted to have a beautiful encounter with her in God's capital behind Lu Hanyan's back? That was impossible. After coming to God's capital, Li Mu had always kept himself clean. He had rejected the brothel madam's offer of a lifetime of free sex. The only woman he had interacted with was Mr. May. Li Mu couldn't possibly have any impulse towards her. He looked at the woman curiously. What would happen between his subconscious and the unfamiliar woman in his dream? As soon as this thought popped into his mind, the woman in the pavilion suddenly disappeared before his eyes. Then a huge force came from Li Mu's buttocks and he was sent flying. When he turned his head again, he saw that a whip had appeared in the woman's hand. She flicked her hand lightly and the shadow of the whip flew towards him. Li Mu wanted to dodge, but he realized that his body couldn't move at all. He could only watch helplessly as the whip lashed his body. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The long whip in the woman's hand lashed Li Mu's body over and over again. The pain was actually real. Although it wasn't unbearable, Li Mu's heart was filled with shame. Why would he have such a dream of being lashed by a strange woman with a whip? At this moment, Li Mu even suspected that he had some strange tendencies in his heart. In the dream, the woman waved the whip angrily, causing a few more whip shadows to appear. In the room, Li Mu suddenly jumped up from the bed. He opened his eyes and panted heavily. Xiao Bai crawled up and looked at him worriedly. "Benefactor, what's wrong?" she asked. Li Mu looked at his surroundings and came back to his senses after a long while. He shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I just had a dream." He lowered his head and looked at his body. There were no injuries or pain. The dream just now had been so real that he couldn't tell whether it was a dream or not. Fortunately, it was just a false alarm. After waking up, Li Mu had a deep self-doubt. Why would there be such a thing in his subconscious? Could it be that he had awakened a certain attribute in his heart after witnessing others being beaten? Li Mu heaved a sigh of relief and patted his chest. He stopped his wild thoughts and lay down again. After having such a nightmare, his energy was somewhat overdrawn. After lying down, he quickly fell asleep again. The next moment, the familiar fog appeared before his eyes again. The beautiful woman stood in the fog and looked coldly at Li Mu. She said coldly, "You still dare to come back?" Li Mu's body stiffened. He saw several whip shadows coming at him again. Chapter 222. As soon as he closed his eyes, he saw the familiar woman and the familiar shadow of the whip again. Li Mu was dumbfounded. How could one continue to dream? He seriously suspected that something had gone wrong with his cultivation and that he had encountered a nightmare or inner demon. At this moment, Li Mu felt as if he had been suppressed by a ghost. His body on the bed could not move and his body in the dream could not move either. He could only watch helplessly as the whip landed on his body, bringing him a wave of burning pain. Even though he knew that he would not be hurt in reality, he was still angry and humiliated. In his own dream, he was actually bullied by a wild woman who came out of nowhere. Who could tolerate this? Although his body could not move, his mind was not restricted. This was his dream. Everything in the dream was under Li Mu's control. However, even though he was in a dream, he still needed to be extremely calm to be able to completely control the dream. Li Mu closed his eyes and silently recited the clear heart mantra to keep his mind clear. After a while, he opened his eyes again. Boom! A bolt of white lightning descended from the sky and struck the woman's head. Everything in the dream was an illusion. Even though the woman was extremely beautiful, Li Mu did not show any mercy when he destroyed her. The woman only raised her head to look and the white thunderbolt collapsed instantly. Li Mu was dumbfounded again. Just now, the woman had taken away his control of the dream. Whose dream was this? Li Mu was unwilling to admit defeat. The thunderbolt in the fog exploded again, but this time the white thunderbolt turned purple. It was the advanced purple heaven thunderbolt. The woman did not even raise her head. She only waved her sleeve and the purple thunderbolt collapsed again. Li Mu imagined again that a flying sword appeared in the fog. The flying sword split into 2, then 4, and finally thousands of sword shadows slashed at the woman. The woman gently raised her hand. The fog behind her surged and turned into a white fog hand, wiping away the sword shadows. After erasing the sword shadow, the white misty hand did not disappear. Instead, it reached forward and grabbed Li Mu. Then the misty hand suddenly turned into several thick tentacles and bound Li Mu's limbs. Li Mu's whole body was spread out in the air. The shadow of a whip appeared in front of his eyes again. Who? On the bed, Li Mu's body bounced up again. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. His breathing was rapid, and the lingering fear in his heart had not disappeared. Xiao Bai got up from beside him and gently patted his back. She asked worriedly, "Benefactor, did you have a nightmare again?" "What the hell?" Li Mu touched his chest and could feel his heart beating violently in his chest. That dream was so real, it was as if he had really been ravaged by that woman in the dream. Not only did he have nightmares, he even had nightmares consecutively. Li Mu's expression changed slightly as he muttered, "Could it be that I've really encountered my inner demons?" Inner demons were something that almost every cultivator would encounter in the process of cultivation. They were the flaws and obstacles in a cultivator's mind, consciousness, and psychology. Hatred, greed, delusion, lust, obsession, and delusion could all lead to the creation of inner demons. With inner demons, one's cultivation would stagnate in the short term. In the serious case, one would go berserk and even be in danger of losing one's life. For example, Li Qing, a cultivator who had cultivated bit by bit and painstakingly, had an unusually strong mind. Even if inner demons appeared, they could easily overcome them. Because of his special constitution and sufficient resources, Li Mu's cultivation speed was far beyond the reach of most cultivators. The training and improvement of his mind could not keep up with the growth of his dermic powers. This was something that could not be avoided. Therefore, he had always been worried about inner demons. Many cultivators ended up as lunatics because they could not overcome their inner demons. Li Mu felt that he might have encountered his inner demons. The forms of inner demons were ever-changing. Everyone's inner demons were different. They were formed from the flaws and obstacles in a cultivator's mind. The woman in his dream was so violent. Was it because he had taken the initiative to find trouble and beat up so many nobles in the Immortal's capital? Was that why such a violent inner demon had appeared? Li Mu could not be sure if this was a coincidence. He lay down again and closed his eyes. In the fog, the woman held the whip in one hand and looked coldly at Li Mu. Again. Li Mu looked at her with grief and anger and left the dream. He sat on the bed with a gloomy expression. The first time was an accident, the second time was a coincidence, but the third time could not be explained by accident or coincidence. He might have really encountered his inner demons. It was not an illusion but Li Mu's own dream. The woman in his dream was also a figment of his subconscious mind. Even Li Mu himself could not control it. If he did not overcome his inner demons, he might not be able to sleep peacefully in the future. It was impossible for him to sleep tonight. Li Mu walked to the courtyard alone. He looked at the full moon above his head and felt melancholy. He did not know that opposite him, a figure that did not exist in this space was looking at him indifferently. Xiao Bai walked out of the room and sat beside Li Mu. He asked with a worried expression, "Benefactor, what happened?" Li Mu did not want him to worry. He shook his head and said, "Nothing. I just miss your sister Lu and Wanwan. I can't sleep. You go to sleep first." Wanwan sat beside him and said, "I'll stay here with you, benefactor." The next morning, Li Mu came to the government office listlessly. Zhang Chun, who had just experienced a housewarming and a promotion, saw Li Mu's expression and said with a smile, "The emperor's heart is unpredictable. His Majesty did not reward you this time, but there will be another chance." This was what Li Mu had once said to him. Now he gave it back to Li Mu. Last time he had done so much. In the end, the emperor only rewarded Li Mu. This time, from beginning to end, it was Li Mu who did all the work. In the end, he was the one who was promoted and moved. Zhang Chun finally felt a little better. Although the emperor had only rewarded him with 2 rooms, far from being able to compare to Li Mu's 5 rooms, it was enough for their family. His daughter had her own courtyard. He finally did not have to worry that his daughter, who was separated by a wall, would hear him and his wife at night. Last night he was happy until midnight. When he woke up in the morning he felt refreshed. On the other hand, Li Mu must not have slept well last night. In reality, Li Mu did not sleep at all last night. As soon as he closed his eyes, his inner demons would take the opportunity to invade. Last night he had been ravaged by that woman 8 times in his dreams. His entire person was about to collapse. After arriving at the government office, Li Mu returned to his courtyard at the back of the government office and tried to fall asleep again. This time he fell asleep quickly. Moreover, the woman did not appear. Li Mu was slightly happy. He tried a few more times but the woman still did not appear. He let out a long sigh of relief. Perhaps the inner demons did not appear every time. If he had that kind of nightmare every time he fell asleep, he was afraid that his entire person would collapse. Feeling a familiar aura appear in the courtyard, Li Mu got out of bed and walked into the courtyard. He asked, "Sister May, what's the matter?" Mr. May said, "Nothing. I'm just here to see you." Li Mu said regretfully, "I thought the emperor finally remembered and was ready to reward me." Mr. May glanced at him and said, "Hasn't the emperor rewarded you enough? What else do you want?" Thinking of the 2 Earth-class magic treasures and the 5-sectioned house, Li Mu did not say anything in the end. Even if the substitute silver was abolished, he had contributed the most but did not receive a reward. However, the reward before was enough to cover all his contributions. Mr. May pretended to look away from him casually and said, "The emperor is the ruler. You are the subject. You have to be more respectful to the emperor." Li Mu felt strange and said, "I have never seen the emperor. How can I respect the emperor?" Mr. May said, "What I mean is that you cannot be disrespectful to the emperor in private. You also cannot criticize the emperor. You have to protect the emperor." Li Mu thought about it. Although he was a little gossipy about the current empress, he still respected her and had always protected her. He did all these things and risked further offending the old party because he wanted the empress to win more people's hearts. The streets of Luoyang were empty, and the people rushed to worship the state temple. Wasn't that his protection of the empress? Nevin was the empress's guard, so he should know her well. Li Mu's gossipy heart was ignited again. He asked Mr. May, "Sister May, you are always with the emperor. You should know her well. What kind of person is the emperor?" Mr. May stared at him and said, "Have you forgotten what I just said?" Li Mu explained, "I am just taking precautions. I am afraid that I don't know enough about the emperor. If I do something in the future that offends the emperor," Mr. May said, "don't worry. The emperor's kindness and generosity are far beyond your imagination. Even if you offend her, she won't care." Chapter 223. Li Mu had no doubt that the empress was benevolent. Although she hadn't been on the throne for long, she had always been benevolent when she was on the throne. She would often consider the people's feelings. In the case of the evil spirit in Ruyang County, the county magistrate's family had been slaughtered. She didn't follow the usual rules, but followed the people's wishes and pardoned Xiao Yu. However, Li Mu didn't really believe that she was magnanimous. Women were creatures that held grudges. This had nothing to do with their identity, personality, or position. Lu Hanyan wouldn't sleep with Li Mu that day because he said the wrong thing. Li Qing would also find a random reason to make Zhang Xian patrol the streets for 3 days because of his blabbering. The empress had a high position and power, but she was only 28 years old. Although women at this age could be considered mature, their hearts often hadn't changed from that of a young girl. On the other hand, young girls were fickle and calculative. They were often not magnanimous. Of course, whether or not the empress was magnanimous didn't have much to do with Li Mu. He was a firm supporter of the empress. He would only protect her and wouldn't take the initiative to offend her. Mr. May and Li Mu had a strange conversation and then left the government office. Li Mu was confused. He felt that there was a hidden meaning in her words, but he couldn't figure out what exactly she meant. Li Mu stopped guessing. In order to confirm whether or not what happened last night was an accident, he forced himself to sleep again. He tried countless times in the morning, but that woman didn't appear even once. Li Mu finally felt relieved. Until now, the cultivation world only knew a little about inner demons. Some people's inner demons didn't take form. It was just a kind of emotion. This kind of emotion would make people unable to calm down and hinder cultivation. This was the lowest level of inner demons. High-level inner demons could affect the owner's personality and even spiritual wisdom. Some cultivators with weak wills would be invaded by inner demons and lose their spiritual wisdom. They would completely fall into the demonic path. High-level inner demons could even manifest another personality and fight with the cultivator for control of the body. Li Mu was worried that he would encounter such inner demons. However, it was strange that the inner demon formed in his subconscious was a woman and had such a special fetish. In his dream, that woman was terrifyingly powerful. Li Mu couldn't defeat her at all. Fortunately, she didn't appear after last night. Li Mu planned to observe her for a few more days. If she didn't appear in the next few days, it would mean that last night was just a coincidence. 3 days later in the morning, Li Mu was holding on to Xiao Bai. Stroking White E's smooth fur, Li Mu's heart was completely at ease. In these 3 days, the woman in his dream didn't appear. Once an inner demon was born, it would be uncontrollable. After 3 days of peace, it was almost certain that the series of dreams that night were not because of an inner demon. Although Li Mu didn't know the specific reason, as long as it wasn't because of his inner demons, everything was fine. He came to the county yamen in high spirits. Zhang Chun looked at him in surprise and asked, "What happy event did you encounter? Why are you so happy?" Li Mu said, "I slept well, so of course I'm in good spirits." Zhang Chun nodded and said, "That's right. It's more comfortable to sleep in a big house. If you have time, come to my house for tea." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Next time when I have the chance." Hearing him mention a big house, Li Mu's heart began to ache again. This was a classic example of someone who took advantage of others but didn't want to admit it. Commandant Zhang, no, it should be Prefect Zhang now, was flushed with success these days. He had been promoted and moved. Most importantly, all of this should have been Li Mu's. He had very well taken revenge for the suffering and exhaustion he had suffered that day. In the end, Li Mu enjoyed the fruits of his labor. Li Mu didn't want to see Zhang Chun. He walked into a room and asked Wang Wu, "How has Wei Ping been in prison these days? Did he cause any trouble?" Today was the last day Wei Ping was released from prison. Li Mu had been worried about his empress and had almost forgotten about him. Wang Wu shook his head and said, "He's been reading books in prison." Li Mu was surprised and asked, "Reading books? What books?" Wang Wu said, "After he went in, he had Yang Xiu give him a copy of The Laws of Great Zhou. These days, other than eating and sleeping, he's been reading books." One wasn't afraid of hooligans being bold or cultured. One was afraid of hooligans being bold, cultured, and understanding of the law. After Wei Ping had suffered a few losses at Li Mu's hands, he seemed to have learned his lesson and decided to use the law to defeat the law. If he really was familiar with the laws of Great Zhou, perhaps he really could cause some trouble for Li Mu. At the very least, it wouldn't be so easy for him to fish next time. This was a matter for the future. Li Mu didn't care about Wei Ping anymore. He walked out of the government office and patrolled the streets. As a constable, patrolling wasn't Li Mu's responsibility. However, for the sake of psychokinesis, he would do such a small thing himself. The people still greeted him warmly, but there was very little psychokinesis left in their bodies. This was because a large part of the psychokinesis had been taken by Zhang Chun. In addition, it had been a few days since the previous incident. The popularity was no longer there. It was impossible for the people to continue producing psychokinesis. If he wanted to continue to obtain psychokinesis, he had to do something to make them produce psychokinesis. However, after the abolition of the Crime Substitution Silver Act, most of the children of officials in Shandu quieted down. Li Mu couldn't just go up and beat them up indiscriminately. In the past, it was to promote the reform. Now there was no legitimate reason. The sound of horse hooves approached from afar. 3 figures on horseback galloped past the intersection not far in front of Li Mu. After the abolition of the Crime Substitution Silver Act, very few people rode on horses on the streets. Li Mu had seen this person once. It was the Zhou clan's descendant that Wang Wu had advised Li Mu not to provoke. The people pointed in the direction that the Zhou clan's descendant had left and discussed animatedly. Li Mu thought for a moment and chased after them with large strides. It wasn't easy to obtain the psychokinesis of the people. The more others didn't dare to do it, the more he wanted to do it. Li Mu had just reached the end of the street when he suddenly heard an uproar in front of him. It was mixed with the cries of the people. Li Mu's expression changed. He quickly ran toward the crowd in front of him. The Zhou clan's descendant was still riding on his horse. There was a long trail of blood on the street in front of the horse. A few feet in front of him, a figure lay on the ground. It was an old man. His chest was caved in as he lay on the ground, no longer breathing. Golden light surged in Li Mu's eyes. He did not discover the old man's 3 souls. There was only a faint wisp of soul power floating above the old man's corpse. He was already dead. The 7 physical souls were still present, but the 3 souls were already scattered. The 3 souls of mortals would gradually weaken with illness and age. At the end of their lives, they would no longer be able to turn into Yin spirits. Only those who had an extremely strong obsession and resentment when they were alive would have the possibility of turning into Yin spirits if they died a wrongful death. The people surrounded the old man from afar and shook their heads in pity as they looked at him lying on the street. When the 3 of them rode over, the passers-by all dodged. The old man was old and his legs were inconvenient. He did not dodge in time and was accidentally sent flying dozens of feet. Given his age, he was most likely dead. "What are you doing? What are you all doing here?" A few bailiffs from the Ministry of Justice parted the crowd and walked out. When they saw the old man lying on the street, the leader took a few steps forward and stretched out his finger to check the old man's breathing. His face instantly darkened and he said in a low voice, "He's dead." He raised his head and pointed at the young man on the horse. He cursed, "Bastard, you Zhou Minister Zhou." When he saw the person on the horse clearly, he trembled and immediately said, "We still have important matters to attend to. Goodbye." After saying that, they quickly slipped out of the crowd and disappeared. When the crowd saw this, their faces darkened and they shook their heads. Although the Ministry of Justice was not on the same side as the Zhou family, even they did not dare to offend the Zhou family. The two middle-aged men had already dismounted from their horses. Their faces were ugly. They glanced at the young man and said, "Third young master, you go back first. We will take care of this." The young man glanced at the old man and frowned. Just as he was about to turn his horse around, he was blocked by a figure. "It's Constable Li!" the crowd exclaimed. The young man looked coldly at Li Mu and said, "Get out of the way." When the young man opened his mouth, Li Mu could smell the strong smell of alcohol. After driving his horse under the influence of alcohol and killing people, he still wanted to escape the scene. Li Mu said coldly, "Get down from the horse." The young man's face was filled with murderous intent. He swung his horsewhip and charged directly at Li Mu. Fleeing after killing people and still dare to attack. Li Mu leaped up and kicked the young man's chest. The young man was kicked off his horse. Fortunately, a middle-aged man caught him in the air. Li Muhan angrily kicked out. The force of his kick wasn't light. However, the young man's chest actually trembled. He was only sent flying by Li Muhan's kick and wasn't injured. Even so, his face was filled with anger. He pointed at Li Mu and said to the two middle-aged men, "Kill him." The two middle-aged men's faces were bitter. This little ancestor was really spoiled. If he killed one person with his horse, there was still room for negotiation. If he killed this official, they were afraid that it would cause a lot of trouble. One of them looked at Li Mu and said, "This is the young master of the Zhou family's fourth master." He was worried that Li Mu did not know Director Zhou, so he introduced himself first. The name Zhou family was second only to His Majesty in Fairy's capital. If he was smart, he would know what to do. Li Mu's face darkened. "I don't care about the young master of the Zhou family or the Wu family. I am a constable who receives a salary from the country. This person killed people on the street. If I let him go just like that, how can I face His Majesty and the people of Fairy's capital?" The crowd was excited. Constable Li is indeed worthy of his reputation. There were also people who looked worried. This is the Zhou family. How can Constable Li go against the Zhou family? The people from the Ministry of Justice watched from afar. Although they were not on good terms with Li Mu and even had some grudges against him, they had long forgotten about their past grudges. The leader of the constables looked at Li Mu with a complicated expression. "I'm really impressed this time." The person beside him shook his head. "You have to be impressed." The last constable opened his mouth wide and said, "This guy is really not afraid of the heavens or the earth." Chapter 224. Seeing that the constable did not back down even after hearing about the Zhou family, the Transcendent Realm Cultivator looked at the other person and said, "I'll stop him. You take the young master back first." Of course, the Zhou family's disciples could not be taken away like this. This was their duty as guards. Once they reached the Zhou family, everything that happened would be shouldered by the Zhou family. It would have nothing to do with them. Anger rose in Li Mu's heart. It was one thing to ride a horse on the streets. People like Wei Ping, Xianxia, and Zhu Zong were just a little arrogant and liked to bully people with their power. The people suffered some losses and did not dare to speak out. But this person from the Zhou family was different. He rode a horse while drunk and killed people on the streets. Not only did he not feel any remorse, he became even more arrogant. A fresh human life was nothing in his eyes. The two Transcendent Realm Cultivators clearly did not care about this human life either. Li Mu looked at them and said coldly, "Killing, fleeing, resisting arrest. According to the laws of Great Zhou, you can be executed on the spot as a warning to others." The middle-aged man was a Transcendent Realm Cultivator. He stood in front of the Transcendent Realm Cultivator and said with a smile, "You can try." Li Mu looked at him and asked, "Are the lives of people so cheap in your eyes?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "I cannot let you take the young master away. This is my duty." Li Mu looked at him coldly and said, "Sorry, this is also my duty. I am arresting the murderer according to the law. Those who stop me will be punished as well." As he finished speaking, a sword light slashed towards the middle-aged man's head. Zoosh. The middle-aged man pulled out the long knife at his waist and blocked it. Clang. After the sound of metal clashing, the long knife in his hand broke in two and fell to the ground with a clang. At the same time, one of his arms fell to the ground. With Li Mu's current cultivation, Using Bai as a regular weapon was actually not enough. After all, Bai was only in the Xian class. Its greatest use was Madame Chu, who could provide Li Mu with level 4 mana. If he used Bai alone against level 4 cultivators, this sword would instead weaken the power he could unleash. Therefore, when he swung his sword down, he sent Bai into the flask heaven ring and replaced it with the Xian sword. An ordinary sword strike had broken the middle-aged man's saber and severed his arm. His mystic-ranked high-grade weapon was broken into two, and at the same time his arm was broken as well. The middle-aged man stared blankly for a moment, then his complexion greatly changed. He hurriedly used his other hand to take out a piece of fulu and stuck it on the severed arm. Only then did he manage to stop the madly gushing blood. He sat on the ground and circulated his magic power to regulate his breathing. Before the other middle-aged man could leave with the young man, he saw this shocking scene. Li Mu pointed his sword at the two of them and said indifferently, "Killing and fleeing, one of you try to escape?" The remaining middle-aged man's face turned ugly. He didn't expect a spirit condensation cultivator to have such a divine weapon. But he still had to take the young master away. He grabbed the young man's shoulder and the two of them rose into the air ready to leave. Li Mu waved his hand and threw out a piece of fulu. The fulu turned into a ray of golden light and entered the middle-aged man's body. He only felt the magic power in his body stagnate, and he suddenly couldn't circulate it. Both he and the young man fell from the sky. He hit the ground and stared at Li Mu. He asked, "Do you really want to become enemies with the Zhou clan?" It wasn't Li Mu who became enemies with the Zhou clan, but the Zhou clan who became enemies with him. And this wasn't the first time. This time it was time to settle the old and new scores together. Of the two middle-aged men, one was severely injured with a severed arm, and the other's magic power was sealed. Li Mu walked in front of the young man and said, "You want to escape after killing someone? Do you think there are no laws in the Immortal's capital?" It seemed that he wouldn't be able to escape today. The young man wasn't afraid. He only looked at Li Mu mockingly and said, "Let's go." He didn't have anything on him. Li Mu looked at the bailiffs from the Ministry of Justice who were hiding in the distance. He saw one of them holding a metal chain and said from afar, "Lend me your metal chain." The bailiffs looked around, threw the metal chain on the ground and silently retreated. Li Mu waved his hand and the metal chain flew into his hand. He tied up Zhou Chu and walked to the old man who was hit. He sighed and looked around. He asked, "Who is willing to help me carry the old man's body to the county yamen?" The crowd was in a commotion. Soon a man stood out and said, "Constable Li, I'll do it." Li Mu saluted him. "Thank you." The man grinned and said, "It's my duty." Li Mu held the metal chain in his hand as if he was leading a dog. Zhou Chu followed behind him. The two middle-aged men followed closely behind him. Wherever they went, the streets were in an uproar. Why did that man lose an arm? It's so scary. Isn't that young Master Zhou of the Zhou family? Why is he chained up? What crime did he commit? Does it matter what crime he committed? What matters is who dared to arrest him. Didn't you see? The one holding the chain is Constable Li. Other than Constable Li, who else in Luoyang would dare to do such a thing? This is going to be a big show. It's the Zhou family. Show my ass. I'm worried about Constable Li. If something happens to him, who will redress the grievances of the people of Luoyang? At the entrance of Luoyang Yamen, Wei Peng was greeted by Yang Xiu and Zhu Kong. After 5 days in prison, he looked haggard. His hair was messy, his eye sockets were dark, and his beard was unshaven. However, he was in high spirits. He held a thick copy of the Great Zhou Law in his arms and said regretfully, "If I had known this earlier, I wouldn't have suffered so many losses at the hands of Li Mu." Yang Xiu looked at him and asked, "What do you plan to do next?" Wei Peng looked around and said, "I'm not done with him yet. I'm going to..." Before he could finish, he suddenly saw a group of people walking toward the yamen. The one walking in front was Li Mu, whom he had been thinking about day and night for the past 5 days. At this moment, Li Mu's face was gloomy and murderous. He held a metal chain in his hand. A person was tied up behind the chain. Wei Peng recognized him at a glance. He was Zhou Chu of the Zhou family. This was the kind of person he usually met on the streets and needed to avoid. But now Zhou Chu was being chained up by Li Mu like a dog. Beside Zhou Chu were his 2 bodyguards. One of them had a broken arm and half his body was dyed red with blood. The glaring red color made Wei Peng dizzy. Xiao's attention was on Wei Peng and did not see this scene. He asked curiously, "What are you going to do?" Wei Peng swallowed and said, "I'm going to study the Great Zhou law carefully after I go back. I think we were wrong in the past. I must be a law-abiding person in the future." Xiao was stunned. He thought he was hallucinating. In the next moment he seemed to have realized something and he looked forward. He was startled when he saw Li Mu walking towards him with an iron chain that had Zhou Chu tied to it. Wei Peng and the other two blocked the yamen door. Li Mu said in a deep voice, "Move." Before Xiao could react, he was pulled away by Wei Peng and the other two. Li Mu brought Zhou Chu and the other two in. They could still smell the pungent smell of blood. Xiao said in disbelief, "Am I seeing things?" Li Mu caught Zhou Chu. Zhu Tsong swallowed and said, "You're not seeing things. That's Zhou Chu." Xiao was still in disbelief. Although Zhou Chu was not a direct descendant of the Zhou clan, he was one of the most difficult people to provoke among the Zhou clan disciples. He was the kind of person that no one dared to look at when walking on the streets. He murmured, "Catching Zhou Chu? Is he crazy?" Wei Peng's face was a little pale. He said, "This person doesn't want to live. We'd better not provoke him in the future." At the back of the yamen, Zhang Chun was tasting tea. For the past 2 days, he had been in a very good mood, especially when he saw Li Mu's gloomy expression. He had to let him have a taste of the bitterness in his heart at that time. Thinking like this in his heart, when he saw Li Mu walk in with a cold face, the smile on his face became bigger. He said, "Li Mu, sit down and have a cup of tea." Li Mu said, "No, there's a murder case that needs to be heard by Darren." "What?" Zhang Chun immediately lost the mood to drink tea. He stood up and asked solemnly, "What kind of case?" Li Mu said briefly, "Someone was drunk and rode a horse on the street. An old man was killed. I have brought him back. Darren needs to deal with him." Zhang Chun strode to the front of the yamen and said angrily, "Outrageous, who is so bold?" Li Mu said, "Zhou family Zhou Chu." Zhang Chun's footsteps stopped. His face was a little pale. He turned back and asked, "Which Zhou family?" Li Mu looked at him and said, "There's no doubt. It's the Zhou family that Darren is thinking of." Zhang Chun's body swayed. He held the wall to steady himself. He looked at Li Mu and said angrily, "I just took advantage of you a little. Do you have to treat me like this?" Chapter 225. Zhang Chun looked at Li Mu and felt like he had nothing to live for. He had just offended some of the officials in the old party and was even labeled as a member of the new party. In the blink of an eye, Li Mu had captured the Zhou family members. The Zhou family was the core of the new party. All the officials in the new party had to rely on the Zhou family for survival. Now in the vast Luoyang, there was no place for Zhang Chun in the old party or the new party. He knew that the residence given to him by His Majesty was not for nothing. What he owed now he would have to pay it back one day. But Zhang Chun did not expect this day to come so soon. Zhang County magistrates were furious. Li Mu also felt wronged. That was a human life, a living human life. Even if he wasn't a bailiff and didn't have this responsibility on his shoulders as a mere human, he couldn't just watch as Zhou Chu arrogantly left after committing murder. But as a constable he was only responsible for arresting people. After he was arrested, Lord Zhang would have to take the blame. This seemed unfair to him. Should he ask His Majesty to transfer him to the Ministry of Justice through Mr. Mei? Li Mu was thinking about the feasibility of this idea. Zhang Chun's eyes suddenly lit up. He said, "Wait, I am now the Minister of Luoyang. You can go to the Commandant of Luoyang to solve the case." Li Mu shook his head and reminded him, "Although His Majesty promoted you, he did not appoint you as the Commandant of Luoyang. You are still in charge of all matters in the Luoyang Yamen." Zhang Chun was stunned. If that's the case, this official's promotion was for nothing? Li Mu nodded. You can see it that way. The light in Zhang Chun's eyes dimmed again. He covered his face with both hands and said angrily, "What a sin!" After a while he removed his hands from his face. His eyes changed from hesitation to determination. He seemed to have made a decision. Xiao, Zhu Tsong and the others were still at the entrance of the yamen. Zhu Tsong stood outside and looked inside. He asked, "What do you think they will do?" Xiao shook his head and said, "I don't know either. But according to the law, if a horse kills someone he should pay with his life." Wei Peng glanced at him and said disdainfully, "You're the son of the director of the Ministry of Justice. There are many different situations when a horse hits someone. It's impossible to generalize. What do you mean? Zhou asked. Wei Ping thought for a moment and said, there are several situations when a horse runs into someone and causes death. If you didn't break the law and ride a horse on the official road and someone rushes out from the side and is killed by the horse, the responsibility is on him. You only need to pay a small amount of money. If he was walking on the official road and you accidentally killed him while riding a horse, the responsibility would be on you. You would have to compensate for all the losses. But because it was just a mistake, you don't have to pay with your life and you don't even have to go to jail. Not only do you have to take full responsibility for killing someone with your horse after drinking, you will also have to go to jail. This is under the circumstances where riding a horse is allowed. Riding a horse is not allowed in Luoyang. That's another crime. Riding a horse while drunk is another crime. Murder and escape is another crime. Resisting arrest is another crime. Wei Ping flipped open the law of Great Zhou in his hand and said, what Zhou Qiu did was extremely bad. If it were someone else, it wouldn't be too much to sentence him to death. Zhu swallowed his saliva. He suddenly felt that compared to Zhou Qiu, his image was suddenly lofty. Although he also liked to ride a horse on the streets of Luoyang, he didn't dare to ride too fast. He would give the people blocking his way time to dodge. He just wanted to show off and didn't want to kill someone. Wei Peng walked into the yard of the yamen and said, let's see what they will do. In the court of the Luoyang yamen, the old man's body was lying flat on the ground. After the coroner of the yamen examined the injuries, he said, Your Honor, the victim's sternum is all broken. He died from the collision. Zhang Chun looked at the old man and closed his eyes. After a while he slowly opened them and looked at Zhou Qiu. He said, Offender Zhou Qiu, you broke the law by riding a horse while drunk on the streets of Luoyang and killed an innocent old man. On the way to escape you resisted arrest. Countless people on the streets witnessed it. Do you plead guilty? Zhou Qiu had sobered up. He looked at him indifferently and said, I plead guilty. It's good that you plead guilty. Zhang Chun sat back in the main seat and said, According to the law of Great Zhou Book 5, Article 13, if you break the law by riding a horse on the streets of Luoyang and cause serious injury or death, you will be sentenced to more than 10 years in prison. You rode a horse while drunk and attempted to escape after killing someone. You also ordered your subordinates to attack the yamen arresters of Luoyang. The circumstances are extremely bad and have caused serious consequences. I sentence you to be executed and immediately sent to the Ministry of Justice for review. Zhou Qiu shrugged and said indifferently, As long as you like it. Zhang Chun said, Men, throw these 3 into prison first. 2 yamen runners walked over with fear on their faces. Zhou Qiu looked at them with disdain and said, Where's the prison? I'll walk by myself. Seeing Zhou Qiu being taken away without fear, Li Mu did not feel relieved. This was because he knew that this was not the end but only the beginning. Zhang Chun walked down from the court and patted his shoulder. He said, Don't be discouraged. You didn't do anything wrong. Li Mu was actually a little embarrassed to face Zhang Chun. As a subordinate, he had never let Zhang Chun be at ease. Everything he did in Luoyang was actually because he had a strong backing. He was just a small official. The old and new parties could not suppress him through the court. If they wanted to use secret methods, they would have to send out a 6th realm cultivator. Even if it was a 6th realm cultivator, Li Mu could temporarily hold them off for 15 minutes. If they wanted to get rid of Li Mu secretly, they would have to send out a 7th realm cultivator. A cultivator of that level was a deterrent in both parties. They were used to keep the Empress in check. They would not listen to the orders of the Zhou clan or the Shao clan, and they would not care about a small official like Li Mu. Therefore, although Li Mu's status was low, he could do whatever he wanted in Luoyang. However, Zhang Chun was different. He was as timid as a mouse, but he had a strong sense of justice. He wanted to hide from everything, but whenever he needed to stand up, he would stand up without hesitation. This time he had completely offended the Zhou clan. Li Mu looked at him and asked, Have you thought it through, sir? Zhang Chun let out a long sigh and said, I didn't get promoted for nothing and I didn't live in this house for nothing. This is life, Li Mu asked. Sir, do you mean that you've accepted your fate? No. Zhang Chun shook his head and said, We'll make a big deal out of this, the bigger the better. We'll make it so that both the new and old parties can't tolerate me. Then I can be transferred out of Luoyang. Li Mu thought about it carefully and realized that Zhang Chun had a good plan. He was the minister of Luoyang. His position was not high, but it was not low either. Even if he offended both the new and old parties, as long as he did his job well and did not commit crimes or use his power for personal gain, neither party could do anything to him. They could only use some power to push him out of this position and transfer him far away. Out of sight, out of mind. This was exactly what he wanted. No wonder he gave Zhou Chu's case such a harsh verdict. Of course, Zhou Chu's bad behavior had a huge impact, but he probably already had this idea before he decided on the case. Li Mu gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Good, you're really good." Zhou Chu rode his horse on the streets of Luoyang and killed innocent people. He was arrested by the Luoyang Yamen and later sentenced to death by the minister of Luoyang. When this case spread out, it caused a sensation in Luoyang. What shocked people was not that Zhou Chu rode his horse and killed people, but that the Luoyang Yamen dared to sentence the Zhou family to death. Although Zhou Chu was not a direct descendant of the Zhou family, his status in the family was not low. The minister of Luoyang had made a mortal enemy of the Zhou family by doing this. Zhou Chu was just a small 6th-rank official. If he went against the Zhou family, he would not have a good ending. After this, he might not even be able to keep his position. In the Luoyang Yamen. Less than 15 minutes after Zhou Chu was locked up, a man in an official's uniform hurried into the Yamen. When the Yamen saw him, they immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, Minister of Luoyang." The man looked angry and asked, "Where's Zhang Chun?" One of the Yamen pointed and said, "Minister Zhang is at the back of the Yamen." Soon Zhang Chun, who was drinking tea at the back of the Yamen, saw the minister of Luoyang. He had only heard about it but had never seen it before. Before him, the Luoyang Yamen was dispensable. Even the officials, there were officials from other departments. They would not come to the Yamen on a normal day. As the minister of Luoyang, this was his first time seeing the minister of Luoyang. The minister of Luoyang reprimanded him, "Your men captured Zhou Chu and you sentenced him to death?" Zhang Chun said, "Zhou Chu was drunk and rode his horse to kill people. He fled and resisted arrest. Is it wrong for me to sentence him to death?" The minister of Luoyang gritted his teeth and said, "Do you know who he is?" Zhang Chun said calmly, "I don't care who he is. If he broke the law, he should be punished according to the law. The last one who bent the law was beheaded by His Majesty." The minister of Luoyang explained, "What I mean is that you don't have to punish him so harshly. You can take him into custody first and judge him slowly." Zhang Chun asked mockingly, "Take him into custody first and drag it out until the people forget about it. Then close the case hastily. Is this how the Luoyang Yamen used to do things?" The minister of Luoyang pretended not to hear Zhang Chun's mockery. He said, "It's better for you, me and everyone else." Zhang Chun shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. I can't do that." The minister of Luoyang said with a sullen face, "From now on I'll take over this case. You don't have to worry about it anymore." Zhang Chun shrugged and said, "Do as you wish. I've sent the file to the Ministry of Justice anyway. We're just waiting for their approval." The minister of Luoyang pointed at him and said angrily, "You?" Zhang Chun asked, "What about me? Your future is gone." The minister of Luoyang said coldly and turned to leave in big strides. Zhang Chun walked out of the door and exhaled deeply. He exclaimed, "Nice." He stood in the courtyard and was silent for a while. Suddenly he looked at Li Mu and asked, "Are you close to Mr. Mei from the internal guards?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Not bad." Zhang Chun thought for a moment, then said, "Next time you see her, help me ask if the residence bestowed by His Majesty can be sold." Chapter 226. In fact, Li Mu had already investigated Lord Zhang's question. Other things bestowed by Her Majesty, such as silk and magic treasures, could be dealt with on their own, but not official residences. Official residences bestowed by Her Majesty or the Imperial Court could be modified, renovated, or even rebuilt, but they couldn't be sold. When officials left Chengdu, they had to return the deeds to the house and the land. In other words, whether it was Lord Zhang's 2-sectioned house or Li Mu's 5-sectioned house, they still belonged to the Empress and the Imperial Court. After hearing this, Zhang Chun sighed and said, "What a loss." Li Mu didn't want to discuss the mansion with him anymore. He asked, "What happened to Zhou Chu?" Zhang Chun shook his head and said, "Even if there are many people from the old party in the Ministry of Justice, I'm afraid they won't be so opposed to the Zhou family. The conflict between the old party and the new party is about the succession of the throne. Other than that, they're actually the same kind of people. They're all privileged people in the Great Zhou. Moreover, Her Majesty's surname is Zhou. Li Mu thought for a while and said, if Her Majesty favors Zhou Chu, then I don't want to be a constable in Shendu. Zhang Chun suddenly became alert and said, where do you want to go? Li Mu said, back to Beijun. Maybe I'll enter the ancestral court of Fu Lu School. He came to Shendu to win the love of the people, to obtain psychokinesis, and to obtain cultivation resources from the Empress. All of this was on the premise that Li Mu approved of the Empress. If the Empress's actions disappointed him, Li Mu would change his mind. Big love and small love were all love. Being in love with the woman he loved and cultivating both yin and yang could not only fulfill the 7 emotions, but also speed up his cultivation. Although his cultivation speed might not be as fast as hugging the Empress, at least he wouldn't be bullied. After hearing that Li Mu was going to the ancestral court of Fu Lu School, Zhang Chunming heaved a sigh of relief. After thinking for a while, he said, actually, I think that it's much better for you to enter the ancestral court of Fu Lu School than to be a servant in Luoyang. Why do you have to be so tired every day? Why don't you just resign? Do you know how to write a resignation letter? If not, I can help you. Zhang Chun was very active in urging Li Mu to resign. Li Mu waved his hand and said, let's see how it goes. Zhou residents. The news of Zhou Chu's drunkenness and his execution by the Luoyang Yamen had already reached the Zhou mansion. Even the maids and servants of the Zhou mansion found it hard to believe. Before Her Majesty became the Empress, the Zhou family was one of the most prominent families in the Immortal's capital. It had been many years since something like this had happened to the Zhou family. After leaving the Luoyang Yamen hurried to the Zhou mansion and was led by the gatekeeper. After walking for a long time and passing through countless moon gates, he arrived at a courtyard in the Zhou mansion. There were many important people in the Zhou mansion and he was not qualified to meet most of them. Therefore he went directly to Zhou Chu's father, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, Zhou Ting. As soon as he entered, Zhou Ting asked, how did it go? The Luoyang Yamen gritted his teeth and said, that damn Zhang Chun. He's determined to go against you. I was too late. He's already submitted the verdict to the Ministry of Justice for review. I'm afraid we can't get around them. Zhou Ting's face darkened. He said coldly, Zhang Chun. I remember this name. He glanced at the Luoyang Yamen and said, all right, you may leave. After the Luoyang Yamen left, Zhou Ting walked out of the room and disappeared under the sunlight. Ministry of Justice. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Zhong, was flipping through a case file. At a certain moment he closed the file in his hand and glanced at the door. The 2 doors slowly closed. He looked at the empty space opposite him and said, aren't you afraid of being criticized for coming to the Ministry of Justice, Lord Zhou? Zhou Ting's figure appeared on the chair opposite him. Zhou Ting picked up the teacup on the table and drank the tea in one gulp. He said, if you didn't know I was coming, who did you make this tea for? The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice smiled and asked, what do you think of the tea? Zhou Ting frowned and said, I'm not here to drink tea. I only want to ask you one thing. What do you want me to do for you to let my son go? The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice shook his head and said, your son was drunk and rode a horse. After killing a commoner, he tried to escape and resisted arrest. His actions were terrible. The Luoyang Yamen sentenced him to death. It's reasonable. Zhou Ting looked him in the eye and said, you should know that I have many ways to protect him. Going through the Ministry of Justice is the simplest way. I don't want trouble, but I'm not afraid of trouble either. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice thought for a while and said, we want the position of County Lieutenant of Nanyang County. No. Zhou Ting did not hesitate and said angrily, don't you think you're asking for too much? The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice shook his head and smiled. He said, does Lord Zhou think that your son's life is not worth the position of County Lieutenant of Nanyang County? Zhou Ting was silent for a while and said, this is not something I can decide. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice said, then let someone who can make the decision talk. Zhou Ting looked at him and his figure gradually faded. After 15 minutes, he reappeared on the chair opposite the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. He said calmly, the position of County Lieutenant of Nanyang County is yours. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice threw the file aside and said, Although he can avoid execution, his actions are too terrible. Even if the victim's family forgives him, he can still be locked up for a few years for killing, fleeing, resisting arrest, and resisting arrest. There shouldn't be a problem for him to hide outside and return to the Luoyang County after a few years, right? Zhou Ting said, no. Before the Substitution Silver Act was abolished, this case was just a little troublesome and could be settled with silver. However, now that the Substitution Silver Act was abolished, it was not easy for anyone to settle a murder case in the Luoyang County with simple methods. He glanced at the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice again, and his figure faded away. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhou Xian, had the same surname as him, but he firmly supported the old faction of the Xiao family and was the political enemy of the Zhou family. However, sometimes the most trustworthy person was the enemy. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice looked at the file sent by the Luoyang County government and shook his head. He said softly, "What will you do?" The Luoyang County government. Li Mu was still patrolling outside when he received a message from Wang Wu. The Ministry of Justice had rejected Lord Zhang's request to be executed. The government had its reasons to execute him, but the Ministry of Justice also had their reasons to reject it. The reason given by the government was that Zhou Ting was drunk and riding a horse, causing death. Later he attempted to flee and resisted arrest. His actions were too terrible and he should be sentenced to death for manslaughter. The Ministry of Justice did not approve it because the Zhou family had compensated the deceased's family with a large sum of money and the old man's family had written a letter of forgiveness. Under normal circumstances, for manslaughter and unintentional murder, as long as the family was forgiven, the government would give a lighter sentence. Once Zhou Ting was forgiven by the deceased's family, he would be able to escape death. This was in accordance with the law, even in Li Mu's later life. Li Mu returned to the government office. Zhang Chun shook his head and said, "There's nothing we can do." The deceased's family was not well off. The Zhou family compensated them with a large sum of money, enough for them to live the rest of their lives without worry. The deceased's family wrote a letter of forgiveness and the Ministry of Justice decided to give a lighter sentence. Zhou Ting will be sent to Jiujiang County to serve 3 years of hard labor. Wang Wu sighed and added, "Jiujiang County, they are all members of the new party." Zhou Chu just changed his place to be happy. Jiujiang County is far away from Chengdu. Zhou Chu will be more comfortable in Jiujiang County than in Chengdu. Deputy Constable Sun walked in and said to Li Mu, "Constable Li, there's someone outside who wants to see you." Li Mu walked to the entrance of the government office and saw a middle-aged couple leading a boy and a girl around 7 or 8 years old. Li Mu looked at them and asked, "Who are you?" The middle-aged couple knelt on the ground. The man looked ashamed and said, "Constable Li, we're not here for the money. You can't beat the Zhou family. Luoyang can live without us, but it can't live without you. Please forgive us." As soon as the middle-aged man spoke, Li Mu knew who they were. They were the old man's family. After receiving the Zhou family's money and writing a letter of forgiveness, Zhou Ting's sentence was changed from death to exile. Li Mu helped them up and said, "I know you didn't do anything wrong. My condolences." He could tell that the couple was sincere and there was no falsehood in their words. Although Li Mu also hoped that people like Zhou Ting could be executed as soon as possible to prevent him from harming the people in the future. For this family, the dead could not be brought back to life. The current ending was the best ending. Li Mu was already very gratified that they were thinking of him. After sending the couple off, Li Mu returned to the government office. Zhang Chun sighed and said, "Don't take it too hard. You've already done a lot for Luoyang and the people of the Great Zhou. If the money for substitution is not abolished, you'll still see him often in Luoyang in the future." An hour later, people from the Ministry of Justice came and took Zhou Ting away from the government office. The outside of the government office was filled with onlookers. Their expressions were indignant. They wanted Zhou Ting to die, but there was nothing they could do. After staying in the prison for a few hours, Zhou Ting walked out of the government office again. When he walked in front of Li Mu, he looked at him with a smile and said, "I told you it's useless." Li Mu's expression was calm as he looked at him indifferently. "We'll meet again. Perhaps it won't take 3 years. At that time I hope you'll still be here." The smile on Zhou Ting's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Li Mu and said, "You're the first person to let me know what the prison in Luoyang is like. It's not easy to meet such an interesting person. I really don't want to leave now." With that he left. The two middle-aged men who went to prison with him also followed behind him. Zhou Ting took a few steps, then turned back and said to Li Mu, "By the way, after I leave, you have to pay more attention to that old man's family. You have to move out quickly. I heard that they live outside the city. Their house is made of straw mixed with mud. Who knows when it will collapse? They have to be careful on the road. There are many people riding horses outside. It won't be good if 1 or 2 people are killed." When he said this, he did not lower his voice. The onlookers widened their eyes. Extreme anger appeared on their faces. A threat. This was a naked threat. This person was actually so daring. He had just killed that innocent old man with his horse. Now he was threatening their family. Was there no law in Luoyang? Li Mu clenched his fists, then quickly relaxed them. Zhou Ting was very satisfied with his reaction. He smiled at Li Mu and said, "I'm just reminding you. I didn't do anything. You have to have evidence before you do anything. Don't accuse a good person." "Ah," Li Mu said, "whatever man does, God is watching. God is watching from above." Zhou Ting smiled disdainfully and said, "God? After so many years, I really want to see what God looks like. If you have the ability, let them come down." Li Mu had one hand in his sleeve. He pointed to the sky and raised his head. He shouted, "Damn God, if you have eyes, you shouldn't let good people be wronged. You shouldn't let such evil people harm the world." Zhou Ting sneered. When he looked up, his expression suddenly changed. Boom. A purple thunderbolt struck down from above. Puff. The purple thunderbolt struck Zhou Ting's head. A strange sound came from his chest. A Fulu card turned into ashes. Boom. After the first thunderbolt, another purple thunderbolt struck Zhou Ting's head. He was still unscathed, but the green brick under his feet exploded with a loud bang. At the same time, a substitute talisman in his sleeve burned. Boom. The third thunderbolt struck. A jade pendant on Zhou Ting's chest turned into dust. Boom. The fourth thunderbolt struck. Zhou Ting's expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with extreme fear. He cried out in shock, "No!" This purple lightning completely engulfed his entire body. In the blink of an eye, only a charred pit was left. Zhou Ting's figure had completely disappeared. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. The noisy street suddenly became quiet. Even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Gulp. It was unknown who was the first to swallow a mouthful of saliva. Whoosh. Everyone turned to look at Li Mu in unison, including the 2 divine ability protectors around him. Li Mu was still pointing to the sky. He quietly removed the handprint in his sleeve. He raised his hands and said, "Don't look at me. It has nothing to do with me. You don't think that a third realm cultivator like me can release the heavenly thunder of purple cloud, do you?" Chapter 227. The street in front of the government office was silent. The commoners looked at the charred pit on the street, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Zhou Quan had already disappeared, but the scene of him being struck to ashes by the divine lightning from the heavens was still replaying in everyone's minds. The 2 supernatural power cultivators looked at the scene in a daze, their bodies turning cold. The purple heavenly thunder was dozens of times stronger than ordinary thunder techniques. It was a high-level thunder technique that could only be released by creation realm cultivators. Even if Zhou Chu had several life-saving trump cards, he could not withstand the continuous lightning from the heavens. The purple heavenly thunder had the power of the 5th realm. Even they could not withstand it. They could only watch as Zhou Chu turned to ashes, his soul dispersing under the purple heavenly thunder. As soon as the last thunder subsided, a figure dashed out of the divine capital office. Zhang Chun's expression changed. He asked, "Purple heavenly thunder? Who attracted the purple heavenly thunder?" Li Mu shook his head, indicating that he did not know. Zhang Chun looked around and asked, "Where's Zhou Chu?" As soon as he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and said angrily, "How dare you? Zhou Chu is a sinner. He was taken away as soon as he was released from the government office. Does the Zhou family have no regard for the law?" Li Mu pointed at the pit on the ground and said, "Zhou Chu is there." Zhang Chun stared blankly at the charred pit on the ground. Li Mu explained, "Zhou Chu killed the old man. After he was released from prison, not only did he not repent, he even held a grudge. He threatened the victim's family in front of so many citizens and was disrespectful to the heavens. Finally, he angered the heavens and sent down several purple heavenly thunders. He died from the wrath of the heavens. Everyone here can testify. Xianxia said in shock, Zhou Xian is dead? Struck to death by lightning? The onlookers finally came to their senses and spoke. The heavens have eyes, the heavens have eyes. The heavens are watching what people do. Even the heavens can't stand his evil deeds. Good strike, good strike. Even the heavens are upholding justice for us citizens. Good has its reward, evil has its retribution. The heavens are watching from above. Zhou Qiu's actions just now had aroused the anger of the people. The people had seen him die from the wrath of the heavens with their own eyes. The joy in their hearts was indescribable. The guard with the broken arm came to his senses and pointed at Li Mu angrily saying, It's you, it must be you, you used to scheme to kill the young master. Li Mu looked at him and said, You have to have evidence before you speak. If I could use the heavenly thunder of purple cloud, I would have destroyed you who are worse than animals long ago. Why would I wait until now? The guard said, Fulu, you must have used Fulu. Li Mu said coldly, Did you see me use Fulu just now? It was impossible for him to use the heavenly thunder talisman in front of everyone. The guard changed his words again, Taoist technique, you use Taoist technique. Li Mu mocked, It can make a cultivator of the third realm use the fifth realm heavenly thunder of purple cloud. If I knew this Taoist technique, the 4 sects and 6 schools of Buddhism and Taoism would have to worship me. Why would I need to stay in Luoyang and be bullied by animals like you? The guard opened his mouth and was speechless. No matter what the cause of the young master's death was, someone had to bear the responsibility. If it was not this constable of the Luoyang government, it would be them. As guards, they would not live long if they let the young master die. He clenched his teeth and crushed the jade talisman in his hand. The moment the jade talisman was crushed, a strong aura shot up from the Ministry of Works. A figure stepped on the air and appeared at the entrance of the Luoyang government in an instant. Zhou Ting looked at the two and asked, What is it? Where is the young master? The one-armed guard lowered his head and said in fear, The young master was killed. Zhou Ting's expression changed. What, my son is dead? The one-armed guard pointed at Li Mu and said, Sir, this person killed the young master. He was furious. Where is his body, where is his soul? The guard said with a trembling voice, The young master's soul has dissipated. Zhou Ting took a few steps back. As a fifth realm cultivator, he could not control his emotions. His body was trembling slightly. He grabbed the guard by the neck and lifted him up. He clenched his teeth and said, What did you say? Say it again. The one-armed guard's eyes were wide open. He said with difficulty, The young master died under the heavenly thunder of purple cloud. Zhou Ting let go of his hand and threw him aside. He looked at Li Mu with a murderous gaze. Xianxia said hurriedly, Sir, Zhou Ting died under the wrath of the heavens. So many people saw it with their own eyes. You can't blame anyone else. Zhou Ting looked at the charred pit under his feet. He closed his eyes and his lips trembled slightly. No one could hear what he said clearly. However, his cold and emotionless voice sounded in the ears of the two guards. Kill this person and I will ensure that your primordial spirits are not destroyed. The two guards looked at each other. Killing an official meant death. If the young master died, they would also die if they went back. Only by obeying the Zhou family would they have a sliver of hope. In the next moment, one of them drew his sword and slashed at Li Mu without hesitation. The other person's artifact had long been broken by Li Mu. He clenched a fist with one hand. His fist was suffused with white light. He punched at Li Mu's chest. Return my young master's life. The sword light cut through the air. The fist created a sonic boom. It went straight for Li Mu's chest. Their speed was extremely fast, but there was someone who was even faster than them. Before the two of them attacked, Xianxia had already taken a step forward and blocked in front of Li Mu. After being blocked by Xianxia, the two of them paused slightly. They were about to push Xianxia back when they suddenly lowered their heads and looked at their chests. 2 small golden swords pierced through their chests. Their hearts were pierced. The two of them died instantly. Just as their primordial spirits escaped, the 2 small swords came back and pierced into their primordial spirits. They exploded immediately. Their primordial spirits were completely destroyed by the self-destruction of the golden sword shadows. In Li Mu's hand, the last 2 sword talismans turned into ashes. He looked at Zhou Ting's father and said coldly, "Those who assassinate an official will be killed on the spot." "You are the constable of the divine capital?" Zhou Ting looked at him. His facial muscles trembled as he asked, "My son died because of you?" Li Mu felt the emotions of the people around him. He knew that this was a rare opportunity to gain their trust. He looked straight into Zhou Ting's eyes and said, "Zhou Ting died because of the wrath of heaven. Even if heaven doesn't kill him, I will kill him. Then you can go to hell." With his only son dead, Zhou Ting had lost his last bit of rationality. A giant golden palm condensed behind him and slapped down on Li Mu's head. "How dare you? How dare you hurt people in the divine capital?" Zhang Chun's face was dark. He raised his hand and slapped out. The giant golden palm turned into specks of light and dissipated in the air. Zhou Ting's eyes narrowed. He looked at Zhang Chun with some caution. At this moment, Zhang Chun suddenly realized something. He spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered a few steps back. He sat on the ground and pointed at Zhou Ting. He cursed, "You Zhou! How dare you try to murder an official of the imperial court in broad daylight? Do you have no respect for the law? Do you have no respect for His Majesty?" Li Mu helped Zhang Chun up. With a flip of his hand, a porcelain bottle appeared in his palm. He poured out a pill from the bottle and handed it to Zhang Chun. He said, "This is a healing pill. Lord Zhang, please take it." Zhang Chun swallowed the pill and smacked his lips. He looked at Li Mu and said, "That palm strike contained decades of experience. I'm seriously injured. This pill is good. Do you have more?" Li Mu gave him the entire bottle. He still had a few bottles of such pills. A figure was rushing over from afar. Soon Li Mu sensed a familiar aura. Mr. Mei appeared beside Li Mu. He looked at the corpses of the two guards on the ground, then at Zhou Ting and Zhang Chun. He asked in a low voice, "What happened?" Zhang Chun pointed at Zhou Ting with a mournful expression. He said, "Mr. Mei, you have to help me. This man tried to murder an official of the imperial court. He didn't care about the law at all. He didn't care about Her Majesty at all." Mr. Mei looked at Zhou Ting and asked sternly, "Lord Zhou, is this true?" The inner guards obeyed the Empress. Even Zhou Ting didn't dare to be arrogant in front of the inner guards. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said, "This man killed my son. I wanted to avenge him. Zhang Chun came to me voluntarily. I didn't try to murder an official of the imperial court." Mr. Mei was shocked when he heard the first half of the sentence. He looked at Li Mu and asked, "Zhou Ting is dead. Did you kill him?" Li Mu hurriedly said, "Lord Mei, you can't simply say that. Just now these commoners were all here. A few hundred pairs of eyes were watching. Ask them, have I ever touched a single strand of hair?" Hearing this, many people defended Li Mu. "It has nothing to do with Constable Li. Zhou Ting was punished by the heavens. We all saw it. He was disrespectful to the heavens. That's why the heavens struck him with lightning. Everyone saw it. He didn't die in one strike. He was struck several times. I counted. He was struck 4 times. The 4th time he was struck by lightning. There wasn't even a speck of dust left. Constable Li must have woken up the heavens with his scolding. The heavens couldn't bear to see Zhou Ting continue to do evil, so they took him in." Mr. Mei looked at the generous crowd and found it hard to believe. The way of heaven was mysterious. No one knew or grasped the rules. If one did evil, they would be punished by the heavens. How many people were struck to death in Luoyang every day? However, with Li Mu's presence, this matter had a trace of credibility. After all, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened to him. She moved her lips and looked at Li Mu. She asked, "Did Zhou Ting really die because of the heavens?" Li Mu nodded and said, "We all saw with our own eyes that after Zhou Ting was released from prison, he didn't repent. Instead, he threatened the victim's family in front of so many people. Later, he was disrespectful to the heavens and insulted them. Perhaps the heavens couldn't stand such a beast, so they struck him with lightning. Not long ago, there was a woman who died unjustly in Yang County. She was wronged and died because of the injustice. After she died, she became an evil spirit. Today, Zhou Ting did all kinds of evil deeds and died because of the wrath of the heavens." He looked at the charred pit on the ground and sighed. "Good and evil will be rewarded. The heavens are reincarnated. If you don't believe it, look up and see who the heavens forgive." Chapter 228. Zhou Ting clenched his fists and veins popped out on his forehead. However, in front of Mr. Mei, he could only suppress the pain of losing his son and his anger towards Li Mu and Zhang Chun. He didn't believe in divine punishment at all. The way of heaven was mysterious, and the so-called divine punishment was just an excuse used by foolish people to comfort themselves. The evil spirit incident in Yang County wasn't caused by her injustice, but by the truth. Zhou Chu's death was definitely not due to divine punishment. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Mr. Mei and said, "Mr. Mei, do you also believe in divine punishment?" Mr. Mei wasn't sure. He glanced at Li Mu and said, "No matter what, the heavenly thunder of purple cloud isn't something that can be attracted by cultivators in the assembled God state. This has nothing to do with Li Mu. We'll only know the details after the investigation." Many commoners and officials heard the thunder in broad daylight in the Luoyang city. 2 constables from the Ministry of Justice arrived late. When they saw the charred pit, 2 corpses, and Zhou Ting whose veins were popping out on his forehead, they knew they couldn't get involved. They were about to leave when Zhou Ting suddenly said, "This case involves the Luoyang government. They should avoid arousing suspicion and hand it over to the Ministry of Justice for investigation." The 2 constables from the Ministry of Justice stopped in their tracks. Their faces fell completely. One of the constables gritted his teeth and walked forward. He asked, "What happened here? Who killed these 2? The 2 corpses on the ground were the most eye-catching things. The constables recognized them as Zhou Chu's guards. Both of them died on the street, but they didn't know where Zhou Chu went. Li Mu said, "These 2 tried to assassinate me. I've killed them in front of everyone. The people around can testify. I can testify that these 2 tried to kill Constable Li. They deserved to die. They did evil with Zhou Chu all day long. They should have died long ago. Why didn't those thunderbolts kill them too?" With the people around as witnesses, it was easy to cover up what happened to the 2 guards. The constable's job was to chase after criminals and bandits. Their lives were easily threatened when faced with the heretical cultivation of demonic ghosts. In the case of a fatal crisis, they had the right to kill the villains who threatened their lives on the spot. As a constable, he could empathize with Li Mu. He understood Li Mu's actions very well. He skipped over this matter and asked again, "What about those thunderbolts just now?" One of the commoners said, "Zhou Chu committed all kinds of evil and was disrespectful to the heavens. The heavens sent down a few bolts of lightning and struck him to death." That constable was stunned on the spot. Giving Zhou Ting a glance, he said in disbelief, "Young Master Zhou was struck to death by lightning?" The development of the matter had greatly exceeded his expectations. This was no longer a matter that the 2 of them could handle. The constable hurriedly said, "This case is of great importance. It must be decided by the Ministry of Justice. Those related to this case, please follow us back to the Ministry of Justice for trial." Li Mu wasn't directly related to Zhou Chu's death, but it was also indirectly related. Naturally, he had to make a trip to the Ministry of Justice. Zhang Chun swallowed a pill and said, "I'll go with you. I'll also go to the Ministry of Justice to demand an explanation for Lord Zhou's palm strike just now." Zhou Ting's face darkened. The Minister of God's capital, Zhang Chun, was as strong as him, but he pretended to be injured by him. How shameless. "We'll go with Constable Li too. We'll testify for him. Go to the heavens and demand justice if you can. Constable Li is innocent. Everyone, let's go to the Ministry of Justice and support Constable Li." The commoners were furious. They followed Li Mu to the Ministry of Justice. At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the bailiff guarding the door was scared out of his wits when he saw this scene. He thought that the people in God's capital were rebelling and attacking the Ministry of Justice. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the people at the front were 2 of his colleagues from the Ministry of Justice. "What's going on? Why did you bring so many people here?" The bailiff walked forward and said, "Quick, get the minister and the assistant minister here. Something big has happened." The minister and assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice were not here. The person in charge of the Ministry of Justice was the Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice was shocked when he heard this. "What? Zhou Chu is dead? Wasn't he sentenced to prison?" The bailiff said, "Minister, you'll know when you go out." In the court of the Ministry of Justice, the Minister of Justice spent 15 minutes before he finally learned the truth from the commoners present. After Zhou Chu was sentenced to exile, he threatened the family of the victim in front of Li Mu and the commoners. His attitude was extremely arrogant. Li Mu could not tolerate this evil. He pointed to the heavens and cursed, hoping that the heavens would get rid of this evil for the people. Then the heavens sent down several lightning bolts and struck Zhou Qiu until his soul was scattered. If not for all the witnesses saying this, the Minister of Justice would have thought that he was listening to a story. If the heavens really had eyes and would punish the evil of the world, then what was the use of the Ministry of Justice? Logically speaking, with the enmity between him and Li Mu, the director of the Ministry of Justice would definitely do his best to give Li Mu an unforgettable experience in the Ministry of Justice since Li Mu had finally fallen into his hands. But he did not dare. The facts had already proven that the person standing in front of the court was a reckless young man who was not afraid of anything. He had just attracted the wrath of the heavens and killed an evil person. If he was angered and he continued to point to the heavens and curse, the next person to be struck by lightning might be the Minister of Justice himself. As the Minister of Justice, he had handed down countless cases. This was the first time he had encountered such a strange and tricky case. It was impossible to say that Zhou Qiu's death had nothing to do with Li Mu. But to say that he had something to do with it, he had to admit that the heavens could hear his pleas and struck Zhou Qiu to death according to his wishes. In this case, what crime should he pin on Li Mu? Hiring someone to kill someone? Hiring the heavens to kill Zhou Qiu. The employer was caught. Should they also arrest the murderer? The problem was, how would the Ministry of Justice arrest the heavens? As a cultivator, he did not even dare to have such disrespectful thoughts towards the heavens. After all, not everyone had the guts of Li Mu. The Minister of Justice looked at Zhou Ting and said, "The idea of the wrath of the heavens is ridiculous. Is there a possibility that the person who killed your son was actually a fifth-level master who was hiding in the dark?" He did not like Zhou Qiu's actions but did not dare to act openly. So he took the opportunity when Li Mu was cursing the heavens to kill your son with the heavenly thunder of purple clouds, eliminating evil for the sake of the people. Zhou Ting's son had just died. The Minister of Justice originally wanted to choose his words carefully, but in the end, driven by his conscience, he said this word. Although he had done many evil things in the past few years against his conscience, he could be considered a good person compared to Zhou Qiu. He killed an innocent person with his horse. The Zhou family had paid a great price to get Zhou Qiu out of prison. But not only did he not restrain himself, he became even worse. As soon as he was released from prison, he threatened the family of the victim he killed in front of the constable of the fairy's capital. Was this something a human could do? If he had a shred of humanity left, he would not have done such a thing. It was obvious that the Zhou family had been too prominent in the fairy's capital in the past 3 years. As a result, Zhou Qiu had relied on the Zhou family and was so arrogant that he had lost his humanity. Zhou Ting's face darkened. He said, "A fifth-level master is just your guess. No matter what, Li Mu is related to my son's death. How will the Ministry of Justice deal with him?" When the Minister of Justice heard this, he was already a little angry. The Ministry of Justice did not rely on the new party. The Zhou family was powerful, but this was the Ministry of Justice. What right did he have to speak to him like this? Taking a step back, how would the Ministry of Justice deal with Li Mu? If they dealt with Li Mu, it would mean that they approved of him using the heavens to kill someone. If they dealt with the person who hired the murderer, they could not let the murderer go unpunished, right? How would they deal with the heavens? What kind of person would have the guts to judge the heavens? The Minister of Justice said, "The heavenly wrath still needs to be investigated." Zhou Ting said darkly, "The heavenly wrath is just an excuse they made up. My son's death must have something to do with him. If the Ministry of Justice takes him into custody and interrogates him, we'll definitely be able to get something out of him." The Minister of Justice said with a cold expression, "Lord Zhou, are you teaching me how to do things?" At this moment, Zhang Chun stepped forward and said angrily, "Lord Zhou, your son's death is unforgivable. However, as an official of the Imperial Court, you actually tried to kill me and the Imperial Court's official. How will you deal with this?" He sat cross-legged in the court and said coldly, "If the Ministry of Justice can't give me a satisfactory explanation today, I won't leave." Lord Zhang, who had always been as timid as a mouse, suddenly became unyielding and dared to fall out with the Zhou family. Li Mu only needed to think for a moment to figure out Lord Zhang's motive. Lord Zhang was determined to make a big deal out of this and achieve his goal of being transferred out of the fairy's capital. At this time he could not be left to fight alone. Making a big deal out of this matter would be greatly beneficial to Li Mu. As long as they were in the right, the bigger the matter, the better it would be for them. At most, they would resign and go to Mount Baiyun to live together with Lu Hanyan and Wanwan. Li Mu stepped forward and pointed at Zhou Ting. He said sternly, "You invert right and wrong, and you can't differentiate between right and wrong. No wonder you taught such a beast. He kills people everywhere and he doesn't repent. He's waiting for an opportunity to take revenge. Everyone knows that he's a beast. It's satisfying that he died under the heavenly wrath." His voice was loud and clear. It spread to the ears of everyone in the court and outside the court. The people were in high spirits and the psyche power in their bodies surged. They looked at Li Mushi in the hall and some kind of colorless emotion surged in their bodies. Countless officials in the Ministry of Justice were stunned for a moment when they heard that. Then they felt a surge of pride in their hearts. Regardless of their position, to be able to say such words in front of the Zhou family, even if he was their enemy, was worthy of their respect. This was how a man should be. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice walked to the entrance of the Ministry of Justice and stopped. He looked at the court and reminisced. The Minister of Justice asked, "Assistant Minister Zhou, what's wrong?" The assistant minister looked forward and said, "He looks like an old friend of mine." The Minister of Justice's eyes flickered. He had been an official for many years, but he had only seen the scene in the Ministry of Justice twice. Coincidentally, the mastermind of both incidents was here. In the court, the muscles on Zhou Ting's face twitched and the veins on his forehead throbbed. He said sternly, "Who do you think you are? How dare you insult me?" Li Mu looked straight at him and said coldly, "I've cursed the heavens above and the earth below. I've cursed all the injustices in the world. I'm not afraid of the heavens and earth. Who do you think you are?" Chapter 229. The officials of the Ministry of Justice stood at the door of the guardroom and eavesdropped on the commotion in the court. Ever since Li Mu came to the divine capital, they had seen too many firsts in the Ministry of Justice. The constable of the divine capital made the director of the Ministry of Justice speechless for the first time in the Ministry of Justice's territory. It was also the first time someone scolded an official of the imperial court and an important figure of the Zhou family in the Ministry of Justice's court. Li Mu seemed to have a natural aura around him, a fearless aura. Li Mu's saliva flew everywhere in the court, almost landing on Zhou Ting's face. A crooked stick would have a crooked shadow. Seeing Zhou Ting's face, Li Mu didn't find Zhou Ting's actions strange. He didn't care about his position in the first place and he wasn't afraid of the Zhou family. He purposely played along with Lord Zhang and blew up the matter to find out the Empress's attitude. While Zhou Ting was fuming with rage, two figures walked in from outside. The director of the Ministry of Justice heaved a sigh of relief when he saw them. He quickly walked over and said, "Lord Minister, Lord Assistant Minister, you're finally back. This case is too complicated and I don't know how to judge it." The Minister of Justice said to Zhou Ting, "Lord Zhou, I'm deeply sorry that you lost your beloved son. The Ministry of Justice will investigate this case immediately, and will hand it over to His Majesty to make a decision tomorrow morning. Lord Zhou, do you have any objections?" Zhou Ting knew that he couldn't influence the Ministry of Justice, but he could say a few words to His Majesty. He said with a dark face, "I hope the Ministry of Justice can investigate this case impartially." The Minister of Justice said, "Of course." He looked at Zhang Chun and Li Mu and said, "This case involves a lot of things. You two can return to the Yamen first and wait outside the palace tomorrow. I'm afraid His Majesty will summon you at any time." Zhou Ting's death wasn't directly related to Li Mu, so the Ministry of Justice couldn't detain him. He and Zhang Chun walked out of the Ministry of Justice and were surrounded by commoners. "Constable Li, how did it go? What did the Ministry of Justice say?" Zhou Ting's death was his own fault. The Ministry of Justice didn't blame you, did they? Faced with the concern of the people, Li Mu smiled and said, "Tomorrow the Ministry of Justice will present this case to His Majesty and let His Majesty decide. I believe that His Majesty will give me justice." "We're all with Constable Li. I suggest that everyone write a letter to plead for Constable Li." "I agree. The silk used to sign the book of 10,000 people will be provided by Splendid Workshop." At this moment, Li Mu sensed from the people around him. Other than psychic power, he also sensed emotions that were different from before. This emotion was colorless, and it was the last emotion that he lacked among the 7 emotions. Love originated from the love and respect of the people. The people of Luoyang finally trusted and accepted him after he cursed and swore at the sky and was struck by lightning. Li Mu walked from the Ministry of Justice to the government office. The love he absorbed from thousands of people was enough for him to condense the fifth spirit, non-poison. In the small residence of the government office, Xiao Bai sat cross-legged on the bed to cultivate. She did not know what was going on. Li Mu walked into the room, got onto the bed and sat cross-legged opposite her. He formed a seal with his hands and said, 9 cycles of white qi control the evil spirits, heavenly beasts guard the door, delicate girls guard the door, 7 spirits and softness are at peace with me, do not act rashly, look at the source of form. Non-poison condense. His mana was no longer the same as before. It was extremely easy for him to condense the spirit and follow the spirit. After Li Mu had completely refined the love, Li Mu could clearly feel that there were some changes in his body. His mana had also increased slightly. However, compared to the increase in his mana, what he felt most was the feeling of completion that came from within his body. After condensing the love, Li Mu acutely sensed that there was a trace of love beside him. He opened his eyes and saw Xiao Bai sitting in front of him. She was holding her chin with both hands and looking at him in a daze. Her gaze was so pure and her small face was so delicate. The way she looked at Li Mu with all her attention made his heart tremble slightly. Since the second time she met Li Mu, she had never changed her mind about giving herself to him. After seeing Lu Hanyan, she was worried that Lu Hanyan would be dissatisfied, so she hid this thought. Li Mu had always thought that as a member of the Heavenly Fox clan, she stayed by his side only to repay his kindness. He did not expect that she would have the same feelings for Li Mu as Lu Hanyan. When Xiao Bai saw Li Mu open his eyes, the corners of her mouth immediately curled up. She said sweetly, "Benefactor, you're awake." Li Mu patted her head and said, "Let's go home, the Ministry of Justice." Zhang Chun and Li Mu returned to the Yamen first, but Zhou Ting did not leave. He persuaded his family to make a deal with the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice with his position as the Nanyang Commandery Officer. He listened to his arrangements and gave the old man's family a large sum of money for them to write a letter of understanding. Through the Ministry of Justice, he reversed the sentence of the Luoyang Yamen and changed Zhou Chu's sentence from death to imprisonment. However, all of this was in vain. His son was still dead in the end. When only Zhou Ting and the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice were left in the court, the Assistant Minister glanced at him and said, "I am also very regretful about your son's death, but I have already done what I promised you. Our transaction has been completed. The following matters have nothing to do with me." Zhou Ting's eyes were bloodshot after experiencing the pain of losing his son. He gritted his teeth and said, "That matter is already in the past. There is no need to mention it again. I only want Li Mu to die now." Regardless of whether Zhou Chu's death was caused by Li Mu or someone else created the wrath of heaven to deceive the world, Zhou Ting could not tolerate Li Mu continuing to live in this world. Being pointed at and scolded in the court of the Ministry of Justice, he and the Zhou family had lost all face. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice said, "I'm afraid it won't be that easy to kill Li Mu. He is now affecting the people of the Luoyang. Moreover, your son's actions have indeed incurred the wrath of the heavens. His Majesty will not let him die, nor will your Zhou family unless he killed Zhou Chu. However, he clearly does not have the ability to kill Zhou Chu. If you want to avenge your son, you can only stab the heavens." A moment later, Zhou Ting walked out of the Ministry of Justice aggressively. In order to settle this matter, the Zhou family had paid a heavy price. However, in the end, an important chess piece of the Zhou family in Nanyang Commandery was lost. His son was also lost. It could be said that he had lost both his son and his army. He wanted nothing more than to cut Li Mu into 1,000 pieces and grind his bones to dust. However, there was nothing he could do. As soon as he returned to the Zhou family, a servant came to invite him, saying that the master wanted to see him. Zhou Ting passed through a few doors and arrived at a study. He knocked on the door and a dignified voice said, "Come in." Zhou Ting walked into the study and said sorrowfully, "Big brother Chuer is dead." In the study, an imposing figure said, "I already know." The figure sighed and turned to look at him. He said, "I've already warned you to be strict with yourself and discipline your son well. However, you never listened and allowed him to do as he pleased in the Luoyang. That's why he has today's consequences." Zhou Ting said sorrowfully, "It's too late to say all this now. Chuer is dead. His soul has dissipated. He doesn't even have the chance to become a ghost. I must catch Chu Er's murderer and tear him to pieces. The figure was silent for a moment. He asked, "What did the Ministry of Justice say?" Zhou Ting gritted his teeth and said, "The Ministry of Justice suspects that a Fifth Realm powerhouse killed Chu Er under the guise of heavenly wrath." The figure calculated with his fingers and shook his head. No one else was involved in Chu Er's death. It's indeed related to that constable. Zhou Ting's eyes widened. Although he really wanted Li Mu to die, he did not think that Zhou Chu's death was caused by Li Mu. He was just a third realm constable and did not have that kind of ability. However, Big Brother had the cultivation of Zhou Xian. He could read the stars and predict heavenly secrets. It was impossible for him to be wrong. Zhou Ting said furiously, "It's really him. How did he kill Chu?" The figure shook his head and said, "Heavenly secrets are hard to predict. It's already the limit for him to be able to predict that Chu Er's death is related to him." Zhou Ting said, "I'll beg the Dean and His Majesty. They'll definitely be able to calculate everything." The figure shook his head and said, "Although the Dean and His Majesty have high cultivation, they can't calculate much more than me. It's better not to disturb them. It's not difficult to find out how that constable killed Chu. As long as we use the soul assimilation technique on him, the truth will come to light." Zhou Ting thought about it and said in disbelief, "There are no traces of Fulu being used at the scene. There's also no such Dao technique. Could it really be?" The figure was silent for a moment. Then he said calmly, "If that's the case, you don't have to pursue this matter anymore." Zhou Ting was stunned. Then he said with a ferocious expression, "Am I going to die for nothing? If it's heavenly wrath, then it's the will of the heavens." The figure said, "The will of the heavens comes first. The Zhou family cannot lose their sense of righteousness. You must consider the big picture." Zhou Ting was silent for a long time. Then he said slowly, "I understand." Chapter 230. Zhou Mansion. As the most powerful family in the Great Zhou dynasty, the scale of the Zhou Mansion in the divine capital was even greater than that of the Shao Mansion. The Zhou Mansion was more than 100 feet long from north to south and 50 feet wide from east to west. The mansion occupied a large area. The Zhou family was prosperous. The four brothers all held important positions in the imperial court. It was said in the divine capital that the Zhou family supported half of the imperial court in the Great Zhou. This was not an exaggeration. At this moment, in a courtyard in the Zhou mansion, a middle-aged woman had fainted from crying after hearing the news of Zhou Chu's death. "Chu Er, my poor Chu Er." Her sorrowful cries penetrated the walls of the courtyard. The maids and servants who passed by all lowered their heads and hurried past. Zhou Chu's two sisters had already married out of the Zhou family. When they heard the news, they hurried back to console the woman. The woman cried until her tears ran dry. She grabbed Zhou Ting's hand and her eyes were filled with murderous intent. She gritted her teeth and said, "Master, the person who killed Chu must be cut into 1,000 pieces. Then his soul must be captured and burned by the nether fire day and night." Zhou Ting said coldly, "Don't worry. I will make him beg for death to comfort Chu Er's soul in heaven." A young woman beside the woman raised her head and looked at Zhou Ting. She said, "Father, when I came here, I heard from my husband that this matter is not easy to deal with. It could easily incite a rebellion among the people. Why don't you go to the palace and beg my sister? Beg Her Majesty to uphold justice for my brother?" The other young woman beside her could not bear it. She opened her mouth several times, but in the end she sighed and did not say anything. Zhou Ting said, "Ever since we forced her to marry the former crown prince, Her Majesty has been holding a grudge against the Zhou family. In these 3 years she has deliberately distanced herself from the Zhou family. If I go to the palace and beg her, I'm afraid," the young woman who spoke first said, "no matter what, Chu is still her family. No matter how cold-blooded she is, she won't ignore Chu's death, right?" The woman gritted her teeth and said, "If she refuses to see you, ask Big Brother to see her. Although she is Her Majesty, will she refuse to see her own father?" Zhou Ting lowered his head and said, "Big Brother wants me to consider the big picture. It's impossible for him to interfere in this matter." The woman said angrily, the big picture, Chuan's life is already gone and he still wants to take care of the big picture? This is also related to the Zhou family's face and dignity." "Shut up." Zhou Ting reprimanded her and said, For this day our Zhou family has waited for hundreds of years. The burden on Big Brother's shoulders is not something we can imagine. He concealed the sorrow in his eyes, straightened his collar and said, I'll enter the palace first. The imperial palace. Zhou Ting stood in front of a palace and bowed. This Zhou has an important matter to discuss with His Majesty. Miss Shangguan, please help me inform him. The young female official said, I'm sorry, His Majesty had some enlightenment in cultivation today and went into seclusion early in the morning. If Lord Zhou has anything to say, we can talk about it tomorrow morning. Zhou Ting was silent for a while before saying, since that's the case, this official will return first. The young woman turned and walked through the palace into the garden behind it. Mr. May stood behind a figure and said, Your Majesty, today in front of the godly capital government. The Empress said, I know. Her voice was very dignified, as if there was no emotion in it. Mr. May hesitated for a moment before saying, Your Majesty, Zhou Chu's actions have already caused resentment among the people. Although he died because of Li Mu, his death can't be blamed on Li Mu. Otherwise, the people that Your Majesty worked so hard to gather in the godly capital will scatter. The Empress looked ahead and said, You seem to be very protective of Li Mu. Mr. May said, I brought him here from the North County. After he came to the godly capital, everything he did was for the people and for Your Majesty. I just feel that someone like him shouldn't suffer such injustice. The Empress asked, Ollie, what do you think? The young female official thought for a while and said, Although he sometimes speaks without thinking, he's a good person, a good official. The godly capital lacks people like him. Zhou Chu died from the heavenly thunder of purple cloud, and he's only a spirit condensation cultivator. Perhaps someone else is framing him and trying to take advantage of the situation. The Empress waved her sleeves and a clear image appeared in the air. In the image, Zhou Chu was arrogant. He threatened the family of the deceased, causing anger among the people. The young constable pointed at the sky and yelled, Damn God, if you have eyes, you shouldn't let a good person be wronged and let evil people harm the world. As soon as he said that, 4 bolts of heavenly thunder of purple cloud fell from the sky. Zhou Chu blocked it 3 times, but he was still turned into ashes by the last bolt. The young female official and Mr. May saw this for the first time. They were shocked and couldn't recover for a long time. After a while, the young female official asked, Your Majesty, can he really communicate with the heavenly Tao? The Empress didn't answer. She only said, You can leave now. This matter will be discussed in the imperial court tomorrow. After the 2 of them left, the Empress stood alone in the garden. Her temperament gradually changed. The aura of someone who looked down on the world and was high and mighty gradually disappeared. The person standing there seemed to be just an ordinary woman. Gradually, even her appearance began to change. Her originally elegant and beautiful face gradually became ordinary. The magnificent crown on her body also transformed into ordinary clothes. Her figure disappeared. At the same time, a woman in green appeared on the streets of the divine capital. The people passing by on the street didn't realize that there was a person in the crowd. The woman in green walked to a noodle stall. When the stall owner saw her, he smiled and said, Miss, you haven't been here for a long time. The woman sat at the noodle stall and said, A bowl of noodles. The owner wiped his hands and said, Okay. Same old rules. Less chopped onions, no coriander. It was lunchtime. There were many diners at the noodle stall. These people were eating and talking at the same time. The scene of the lightning striking Zhou Chu today was so satisfying. Did you all see it? No. When I rushed over, it was already over. Why, were you there? I was lucky to be there. That place was struck by the purple lightning. Not even a speck of dust was left. Quick, tell us. This bowl of noodles is on me. Hearing that someone was paying for today's meal, the man added another plate of beef and began to tell the story. He described how lawless Zhou Chu was. He came out of the divine capital and threatened the family of the deceased. He described how Constable Li was so angry that he pointed at the sky. Heaven and earth felt his heart and sent down several lightning bolts to get rid of this evil in the divine capital. After he was taken away by the Ministry of Justice, he scolded Zhou Chu's father in the court. It was so satisfying. In the process of telling the story, he added some details and added some emotional embellishments. The crowd blushed as if they had been there and witnessed it with their own eyes. After he finished, he didn't forget to exclaim, Constable Li is really a good constable. He really thinks about the people and stands on our side. Another customer sighed and said, this time he has formed a deadly feud with the Zhou family. I wonder how the Zhou family will take revenge. Without Constable Li, will the divine capital return to the way it was before? It won't. We've already written a petition for the people. His Majesty will definitely seek justice for Constable Li. The woman in green finished her noodles and listened to the crowd's discussion for a while before she paid and left. Li residence. Li Mu and Xiaobai bought some groceries on their way home. When they got home, they busied themselves in the kitchen. Compared to eating out, he enjoyed the feeling of cooking with her. In the past, Zhou Xian was the one who cooked with him. After he came to the divine capital, Xiaobai was the one by his side. Under Li Mu's guidance, Xiaobai's culinary skills had reached a higher level. She was qualified to be Li Mu's assistant. After the meal, Li Mu told Xiaobai that he was going to the palace tomorrow. At that time he would send her to the government office first. Xiaobai asked worriedly, will Her Majesty blame benefactor? Li Mu shook his head and said, I don't know. After all, his understanding of the Empress was mostly based on hearsay. Li Mu didn't know what kind of person she really was. However, he wasn't afraid of this case. With the clear heart technique, the soul-sucking technique was useless against him. As long as he didn't admit it, no one would be able to pin Chu Zhou's death directly on him. As for the soul-searching technique, it was extremely harmful and irreversible. Unless it was an extremely important matter that concerned the country, the imperial court wouldn't use it on an official. With the people's support, the imperial court would have to be careful no matter what they did to him. Xiaobai said firmly, I heard that Her Majesty is as beautiful as a fairy and has a kind heart. She won't wrong benefactor. Li Mu nodded and said, I believe in Her Majesty. Not to mention her appearance, Li Mu was actually confident in other aspects of the Empress. He came to Shendu because of the Empress. During this time he could be fearless and do whatever he wanted because he had the Empress' support. Women were always very concerned about the appearance of other women. Xiaobai blinked and said, how beautiful is she to be as beautiful as a fairy? Li Mu rubbed her head and said, what do you mean by as beautiful as a fairy? That's because Her Majesty is. No matter how ugly Her Majesty is, no one would dare to say that she's ugly. If you want to know what it means to be as beautiful as a fairy, go back to your room and look in the mirror. Xiaobai was stunned for a while before she realized that Li Mu was praising her. She blushed and said uneasily, I'll go wash the dishes. The girl was still a little shy. If it were Zhou Xian, she might have already fallen into Li Mu's arms and made love to him. Li Mu returned to his room and sat down cross-legged. Not long after, he felt sleepy. In his sleep, a fog suddenly appeared in front of his eyes and a woman's figure appeared. Seeing the familiar woman, Li Mu was stunned. Fear appeared on his face and he said in shock, no way again. Chapter 231. Ever since that night when he was ravaged 8 times, this woman had never appeared in Li Mu's dreams again. This made him think that what had happened back then was merely a coincidence. Until now, this familiar figure had appeared in his dream once again. This made Li Mu realize that the possibility of that incident being a coincidence was infinitely close to zero. Li Mu did not leave the dream immediately. He needed to figure out what was going on. Li Mu looked at the woman from afar and asked, who are you? The woman said indifferently, you don't need to know who I am. Li Mu asked tentatively, are you my inner demon? With Li Mu's knowledge, other than an inner demon, he could not think of any other possibility. Even Zhou Xian could not casually invade other people's dreams. This was something that even Venerable Qianhuan could not do. Inner demon? The woman looked at him and said slowly, you can understand it that way. Li Mu said warily, what do you want? The woman said, I was born because of you. Why don't you ask yourself what you want? Her words made Li Mu no longer doubt her identity. Except for the consciousness born in his body, no one could easily enter his dreams. Many people interpreted the high-level inner demon as a second soul. According to Li Mu's understanding, it was more like a second personality. In the same body, several different consciousnesses were born. Their age, personality, and even gender could be different. Li Mu had seen this kind of setting countless times in suspense movies. Li Mu asked warily, you want to devour my consciousness? The woman shook her head and said, not interested. Li Mu said in surprise, then what do you want? The woman looked at Li Mu and said, you killed Zhou Chu. Li Mu looked at the woman. The consciousness of the inner demon and the main body did not affect each other, so she did not know what she was thinking or what she knew. However, the experiences of this body could not be hidden from her. Although the person in front of him was a woman, Li Mu knew very well that he was her and she was him. He had nothing to hide from himself. Li Mu asked, "Don't people who are worse than beasts deserve to die?" The woman said, "Director Zhou is from the Zhou family, and His Majesty's surname is also Zhou. Aren't you afraid that His Majesty will be biased?" Li Mu looked at her and said, "You know a lot." The woman replied, "You are me and I am you. I know what you're thinking." Li Mu looked at her and asked, "Then tell me, what am I thinking now?" Li Mu thought, if the inner demon only appeared in dreams, if he had a wet dream, what would it look like in the eyes of the inner demon? Whoosh! As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, the shadow of a whip came at him. Li Mu quickly dodged and finally no longer doubted it. She even knew what he was thinking in his dreams. Other than his inner demon, what else could she be? The woman actually did not know what Li Mu was thinking. She only saw that his expression was strange, wretched and lustful. He could not be thinking of anything good, so she might as well whip him first. Li Mu looked at the woman and said, "Don't be impulsive. Hitting me is hitting you." The shadow of the whip slowly disappeared. The woman asked again, "Why are you doing this? What good is it for you?" Li Mu said, "You are me. You don't know why I'm doing this?" The woman did not speak. Li Mu guessed that she could only understand his thoughts in his dreams. He could not help but feel relieved. Worried that she would be angry and hang him up to beat him again, Li Mu said, "Because I am a bailiff. It is my duty to get rid of evil and bring justice to the people. Moreover, His Majesty has treated me with sincerity. I have to clean up the evil in Luoyang and unite the people to repay His Majesty." The woman looked at him indifferently and said, "Help her unite the people? It is unprecedented for a woman to be the emperor. It subverts ethics and disturbs the morals. How can a man become her pawn?" "Watch your words." Li Mu glared at her and said, "During His Majesty's reign he implemented benevolence and reformed the legal system. Many people have a better life. In contrast, during the time of the previous emperor, the 36 counties were filled with corrupt officials. Even Luoyang was a mess. If I don't help such a wise emperor, should I help a tyrant?" Li Mu was dissatisfied with the woman in front of him. As his other personality, she did not have the consciousness of the main personality. Li Mu felt ashamed for having such a personality. The woman was silent for a moment. She looked at Li Mu one last time and her figure slowly faded away. Li Mu pointed at her and said, "Don't go. I haven't finished talking." The woman's figure completely disappeared. Li Mu also woke up from his dream. He touched his head with a puzzled expression. This time he did not get beaten up. This time she was not as unreasonable as last time. He had read about the inner demons in books. They were all violent and murderous monsters. This was the first time Li Mu had heard of such a type. It was a dreamless night. Li Mu hugged Little White and slept until dawn. After sending her to the yamen, he waited outside the palace with Xianxia. The morning court had already begun. They did not know what was going on inside. Until now they had not been summoned. The two of them waited outside the palace in boredom. In the Crepe Myrtle Palace, some of the courtiers were arguing in full swing. An official said angrily, "A country has its laws and a family has its rules. Zhou Xian has already been tried. Who gave him the right to execute on his own?" An imperial censor objected, "Zhou Xian was unrepentant and deranged. He angered the heavens and attracted the thunder fire. What does it have to do with others?" The official said, "Who attracted the heavenly thunder of purple cloud?" The imperial censor said, "Do you have evidence?" Some officials have already calculated that Zhou Qiu's death is related to Li Mu. His death is also related to the heavens. Why don't you interrogate the heavens? You are twisting words and forcing logic. You are trying to accuse him. Whether it is true or not, we will know if we use the soul search on Li Mu. The court was divided into two factions regarding Zhou Qiu's case. One faction believed that Li Mu, as an arrestor, did not have the right to execute anyone. His actions were considered intentional murder. The other faction believed that Zhou Qiu died from the wrath of the heavens. The heavens were greater than everything. Even if the wrath of the heavens was caused by Li Mu, it should not be blamed on him. The two factions argued endlessly. The entire court was very noisy. Silence. The young female official's voice reached everyone's ears. Everyone shut their mouths. The court was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. No matter how they argued, the final verdict of this case still depended on the emperor. The moment the court quieted down, an image suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The scene was the scene in front of the Shendu Yamen. Zhou Chu, who was already dead, was in the picture. The officials were shocked. At this moment, they remembered that His Majesty was not only the emperor, but also an expert of the upper realm. He had already reached the peak of the profound light technique and was able to reenact the past. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the image. In the image, Zhou Chu's expression was arrogant. He said to Li Mu, "That's right, after I leave, you have to pay more attention to that old man's family. I heard that they live outside the city. You have to be careful when you walk on the road. There are many people riding horses outside. If one or two are killed, it will not be good." One of the imperial censors could not help but point at the image of Zhou Chu and said angrily, "Lawless, lawless, does he not have the law in his eyes?" Another imperial censor spat and said coldly, "This is simply the behavior of a beast. He deserves to die." In the court, many people's faces were filled with anger. This was a blatant provocation of the law and justice. They only heard that Zhou Chu was arrogant, but they did not expect him to be so arrogant. Under the strong impact of this image, several officials of the new party also retracted their heads. Whoever dares to speak up for Zhou Chu will definitely offend the public. What worried them more was the emperor's thoughts. His Majesty used his great magical power to reenact the image of yesterday. Does this mean that he is not on the side of the Zhou family? In the video facing the threats around him, the young constable said, "God is watching what we do. God is watching us." Zhou Chu sneered, "God, after so many years, I really want to see what God looks like. If you have the ability, let them come down." The young arrestor was obviously enraged. He pointed to the sky and scolded God for being blind. As his voice fell, several lightning bolts suddenly fell from the sky. Under the last purple lightning bolt, Zhou Chu turned into ashes. Even some of the high-ranking officials in the court felt their blood boil when they saw this scene. A few of the imperial censors were so excited that their beards trembled. Their eyes were filled with envy and reverence. This was the response of the heavenly axiom. It was the greatest recognition that the heavenly axiom gave to a person. There was no imperial censor who did not desire such recognition. A body of righteousness that can shake the heavens. How magnificent is this? He is still Li Mu, the Li Mu who wrote Daoist Injustice. It is His Majesty's blessing to have such a person in the fairies' capital. It is the blessing of the great Zhou. His Majesty must not wrong such a talent. The Empress's dignified voice came from behind the curtain. "How do you think this case should be resolved?" At the forefront of the officials, a figure stood out. Seeing the figure, all the officials held their breaths. The first person to stand out was none other than the head of the Zhou family, Zhou Chu's uncle, and also the Empress's biological father. The middle-aged man looked up at the image and said, "The people's hearts are the foundation of the great Zhou's continuation." Zhou Chu killed innocent people and did not repent. In the end, he angered the heavenly axiom and punished the heavenly axiom. The officials in the court should learn from this and restrain themselves and their descendants. They should not bully the people and bully the villagers. The head of the Zhou family's words undoubtedly determined the nature of the case. Even the officials of the new party would not use this opportunity to attack the arrestor. Zhou Ting clenched his fists and knelt on the ground with his head lowered. He closed his eyes and said in a trembling voice, "I have not taught my son well. I have let your Majesty and the people down. I am ashamed to be in the court. I wish to resign from the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works. I hope your Majesty will approve." Chapter 232. Li Mu and Zhang Chun waited for a long time at the gate of the palace. Instead of the Empress, they saw Mr. Mei. Mr. Mei walked out of the palace gate and said to the two, "It's all right now. You can go back." Zhang Chun was stunned and asked, "What's going on inside?" Mr. Mei looked at Li Mu and said, "Her Majesty used the dark light technique to recreate the scene of yesterday." All the officials were furious. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works, Zhou Ting, resigned because he didn't teach his son well. Her Majesty has agreed that Zhou Ting died because of the wrath of heaven. It has nothing to do with you. You can go back now. Zhang Chun asked, "Is there anything else?" Mr. Mei asked, "What do you want?" Zhang Chun shook his head and felt a little regretful, but he didn't say anything. Mr. Mei suddenly took out a stack of fulu from his sleeve and handed it to Li Mu, saying, "This is for you from Her Majesty." Li Mu looked at the stack of purple cloud thunder talismans in his hand thoughtfully. Mr. Mei handed him a jade pendant and said, "This is also for you from Her Majesty." Li Mu took the jade pendant and looked at it over and over. He didn't see anything special about it, so he asked, "What is this?" Mr. Mei said, "This jade pendant can hide the secrets of heaven. Keep it with you." Hearing this, Li Mu suddenly felt that the jade pendant in his hand became heavier. Hiding the secrets of heaven didn't seem to have any real effect. It could neither increase defense nor enhance attack. However, it had a very important function, which was to prevent the ultimate masters from calculating. The masters of Zhou Xian had already seen through the mysteries of heaven. They could observe the stars and know fate. With a pinch of their fingers they could predict good or bad luck. They could even calculate someone's location and monitor them remotely through the dark light technique. If one had something to hide the secrets of heaven, they could block the calculations of the masters of Zhou Xian and above. This could be very useful sometimes. The jade pendant that concealed the heavenly secrets and the stack of purple cloud thunder talismans made Li Mu wonder if the Empress knew anything about it. Logically speaking, even if a 7th realm expert could calculate that Zhou Chu's death was related to him, they shouldn't be able to confirm whether he had died directly or indirectly at Li Mu's hands. The 1,000 illusions had said before that the mysteries of heaven were hard to predict. No one could calculate all of the mysteries of heaven. The so-called arithmetic was nothing more than some hazy feelings, very difficult to be specific. He accepted the jade pendant and bowed to Mr. Mei, saying, "Sister Mei, please thank His Majesty for me." Mr. Mei sighed and said, "His Majesty has suffered a lot to protect you this time. I hope you will remember his kindness." Li Mu used to have some worries, but after today his worries had disappeared. From today onwards he truly regarded himself as one of the Empress men. It was a pity that he hadn't been summoned today, so he didn't have the chance to see her. However, there was no need to be anxious. Now he had already begun to hug the Empress's thigh. There would be plenty of opportunities to see her in the future. Zhou Manor. Crush. In a small courtyard, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard. The maids and servants all stood in the courtyard with their heads lowered, not daring to speak. The middle-aged woman picked up a vase and smashed it. She panted heavily and gritted her teeth, saying, "Zhou Chu died in vain. I can't accept this, I can't accept this." She pointed in the direction of the palace and cursed, "She's also a member of the Zhou family. How can she be so cruel?" Slap. Zhou Ting slapped her face and said in a low voice, "Shut up. His Majesty isn't someone you can talk about." The woman stood there in a daze after being slapped. Moments later she raised her head and looked at Zhou Ting. She shook her head and said, "Crazy. Everyone in the Zhou family is crazy. I want to leave this place. If you don't avenge me, I will." Zhou Ting looked at her departing figure. He raised his foot and finally put it down. In one day he looked haggard and old. The scene in the court today kept replaying in his mind. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, saying, "Li Mu, the palace." The Empress had been in the back garden for a long time after the court ended. She looked in the direction of the Zhou family. After a long time she retracted her gaze and asked, "Am I really cruel?" The young official said, "Zhou Chu deserved his death. It can't be blamed on anyone. Your Majesty doesn't need to blame yourself for this." The Empress seemed to be asking her, but it also seemed like she wasn't asking her. She didn't say anything else and left the garden. She walked in front of a magnificent palace. Above the palace the words "Ancestral Temple" were written. The young official stopped in front of the ancestral temple. Only the imperial family could enter the Great Zhou's ancestral temple. For them it was a forbidden area. The Empress walked into the ancestral temple. What greeted her eyes was a high platform. On the high platform, from top to bottom, there were more than 10 memorial tablets of the Great Zhou's emperors. In front of the memorial tablets, sandalwood incense rose in spirals. In addition to these memorial tablets, the most eye-catching thing in the ancestral temple was a small cauldron. These small cauldrons had 3 legs and 2 handles. They were neatly arranged in a row under the memorial tablets of the Great Zhou's emperors. After a careful count, one would find that there were a total of 36 small cauldrons. The 36 small cauldrons emitted a faint golden light. The golden light was strong and weak. The strong light was dazzling and the weak light was dim. The golden light of each small cauldron condensed into golden lines that converged in a giant cauldron in the ancestral temple. The giant cauldron had 3 legs and 6 handles. The body of the cauldron didn't emit any light, but there was a golden dragon swimming in the cauldron. The golden dragon felt the Empress walk in and swam out of the cauldron. It happily circled above her head a few times, and then flew back into the cauldron. In the corner of the ancestral temple there were 3 prayer mats. 3 figures sat cross-legged on the prayer mats. Their auras were extremely obscure. They all wore black dragon robes. If one looked closely, one would find that the golden dragon embroidered on their robes only had 4 claws. An old man with a face as withered as tree bark on the left opened his eyes. He looked at the most dazzling cauldron in the center of the 36 small cauldrons and said, "The psyche power of the people of the divine capital has multiplied several times in this month. The guy you transferred from the North County is quite capable." The Empress's expression was calm. She looked at the golden dragon swimming in the cauldron and asked, "When will this strand of Emperor's chi be complete?" The old man said, "During Emperor Wen's time, the sea was clear and the rivers were clear. The people were loyal, but it took 20 years. 2 generations of emperors spent nearly 100 years to produce 1 strand, and it has already been used by you. With the current Great Zhou, it will take at least 30 years for the next strand of Emperor's chi to be complete." The Empress frowned and said, "That's too long." The old man said with a smile, "The Zhou clan has been planning to steal the throne since a few hundred years ago. We've been planning this for so long and our ancestors have sacrificed their lives to obtain a stream of monarch chi, yet you're not interested in being the emperor. How ironic." The Empress said coldly, "The Zhou family's matters have nothing to do with me." The old man smiled and said, "I'm afraid you will have to sit in this position for a long time. You will slowly lose your family and friends. The officials will respect you and fear you, but they will never reveal their true feelings to you. Your parents will call you Your Majesty and have ulterior motives. No girl will get close to you and no man will like you. You will slowly lose love, hate, happiness, anger, sadness. Stop talking. It's useless. This is the fate of every emperor. You will not be an exception." A golden whip appeared in the Empress's hand. She said word by word, "I told you to stop talking." The old man lowered his head and immediately fell into a deep sleep. The Empress walked out of the ancestral temple. The young female official said respectfully, "Your Majesty." The Empress looked at the respectful expression on her face and said, "Return to the palace, Fairy's capital, Li residence." Li Mu had just upgraded the formation in his residence. He used some Fulu and Dharma treasures that he didn't need in a shop in Fairy's capital that was specially opened for cultivators to exchange for spiritual jades. Then he used the spiritual jades to buy a set of formation flags from another shop. Although Fairy's capital was mostly populated by commoners, there were a few markets that were specially opened for cultivators to trade. Using the upgraded formation of the formation chess, it could temporarily trap a 5th realm cultivator. If one wanted to sneak into the formation silently, they would have to have the cultivation of Zhou Xian. After doing all this, Li Mu gave most of the purple cloud thunder talismans that the Empress gave him to Xiaobai to protect herself. He only kept a few for himself. The jade pendant and the thunder talisman that the Empress gave him. One was to steal the sky, while the other was to conceal heaven's secrets. No matter how slow Li Mu was, he understood the Empress's intention at this moment. The purple cloud thunder talisman was the proof that Li Mu would use his thunder technique in the future. Otherwise, after Zhou Chu's incident, he couldn't reveal his thunder technique in front of others. This jade pendant that concealed heaven's secrets would prevent cultivators above Zhou Xian from finding out that he was the culprit. The Empress had thoughtfully prepared these for Li Mu. The Empress must already know that Zhou Chu's death was his doing. A transcendent powerhouse was terrifying. Even so, she still chose to protect Li Mu. This meant that Li Mu still had a place in her heart. He didn't work so hard for her in vain. Not only was she righteous, but she was also so protective. He really loved the Empress like this. Chapter 233. Half a month had passed since the Zhou Chu incident. In the morning, Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, slowly opened his eyes. A golden light flashed in his eyes. Although he had been preparing to cultivate both Buddhism and Taoism, He had spent more than 90% of his time cultivating under the guidance of Taoism. He had very little time to recite scriptures and practice Buddhism. Especially after entering the spirit-concentrating realm, the growth of his mana had slowed down. He had spent all his time cultivating Taoism. Now his Taoist cultivation had reached the third realm, but his Buddhist cultivation had only barely broken through the first realm last night. The first realm of Buddhism was called breakthrough. It meant that Buddhist disciples could see through the mortal world and enter into Buddhism. This realm required the cultivation of the six senses. Now Li Mu's six senses had been perfected. He did not need to use any supernatural powers to hear the conversation between the butcher and the waiter in the tea house a few streets away. Through his sense of smell he could easily distinguish the various smells in the air and trace them back to their source. In a way, he already had the innate supernatural powers of some monsters. Some monsters were born with a keen sense of hearing and smell. Although humans were suitable for cultivation, they were far inferior to monsters in terms of innate supernatural powers. Li Qing had once advised him that only by cultivating one of the two sects of Buddhism and Taoism could one attain a profound level. At that time Li Mu did not feel anything. Now he finally realized that a person's energy was limited. Even if he was talented in both Buddhism and Taoism, it was impossible to cultivate both to a high level. The realms after Buddhism required even more time. His next cultivation focus was on how to break through to the transcendent realm as soon as possible. After the Zhou incident, Zhang Chun was unexpectedly promoted again. He was promoted from Divine Capital Deputy to Divine Capital Magistrate. He was now the leader of the Divine Capital Yamen. Not only that, His Majesty did not appoint a Divine Capital Deputy or Divine Capital Magistrate. In other words, he was in charge of this huge yamen alone. No one could order him around anymore. Li Mu was still the constable of the Divine Capital Yamen. He was an official, not an official. Although officials and officials were both civil servants of the Great Zhou and were paid by the state, there was a clear distinction between the two. There were no harsh requirements to become an official of Great Zhou. Officials were generally appointed by local officials, or their sons would inherit their father's business. As long as their family background was clean and they had not committed any crimes within 3 generations, they would have the qualifications to become a glorious official of the Great Zhou. But officials were different. The lowest-ranking official in Great Zhou, even if it was just a small county magistrate, still needed to receive a few years of formal education in the academy. Only after a few years would they have the qualifications to enter the imperial court as an official. This was a rule set by Emperor Wen in order to clean up the chaos in Great Zhou's officialdom and improve the quality of the officials as a whole. At that time this measure indeed played a very big role. At that time the imperial court was full of nepotism, and the officials formed cliques to pursue personal interests. The morality and ability of the officials were mixed. The appearance of the academy greatly improved the situation. If one wanted to become an official in the imperial court, one had to learn the thoughts of the sages in the academies, cultivate one's morals, and learn how to govern a country and cultivate. For a long time, the academies had sent countless talents to the imperial court. This rule had been passed down since the time of Emperor Wen and had been used to this day. Even if the emperor wanted to promote someone, he had to let that person undergo tempering in the academies. Emperor Wen's rule had a far-reaching impact. In the hearts of the people and officials of Great Zhou, Emperor Wen had a very high status. The successive emperors of Great Zhou did not dare to break the rules set by him. In Li Mu's view, this Emperor Wen was really far-sighted. Although this method was different from the imperial examination, it was also very advanced compared to the previous system of selecting officials. Of course, even if Emperor Wen was called a sage, there were still things that he did not expect. For example, the nature of the academy had changed greatly from when it was first established. The deans of the 4 academies were all transcendents. In the academy there were countless experts in the middle realm. Although they were far from the 4 sects and 6 schools, they were still an incomparably powerful force. The officials of Great Zhou could only be born from the academy. The status of the academy gradually became higher and higher, and even had a tendency to surpass the imperial court. Whether it was the Shao royal family that wanted to regain their glory or the Zhou family that wanted to replace them, to facilitate this major event, they could not do without the support of the academy. Li Mu had never thought of becoming an official, so he did not need to go to the academy to further his studies. Based on what he had seen in Chengdu, becoming an official might not be a good thing. Under the protection of the Empress, being a minor official was much more comfortable than being an official. There was no need for Li Mu to worry about national affairs. All he needed to do was to bring Xiao Bai around the streets of the divine capital every day to ensure that there were no crimes or disturbances in his jurisdiction. That was enough for him to fulfill his duty. After Zhou Chu's incident, his status in the hearts of the people had risen to the peak. This allowed him to obtain willpower from the people of Shen Du without deliberately doing anything. With this speed, it was not impossible for him to advance to the Abhijina level within a year. After Zhou Chu's incident, the Zhou family's reputation in Shen Du was not greatly affected. Although Zhou Chu had committed a heinous crime, the Zhou family's handling of this matter did not make the people feel disgusted. There were many disciples of the Zhou family, and Zhou Chu was only one of them. Other than Zhou Chu, the other disciples of the Zhou family did not have any misdeeds. In comparison, the Shao royal family's performance in Shen Du was even worse. In the past few hundred years, they had been the masters of the great Zhou dynasty and Shen Du. Although they had been suppressed by the Zhou family for a short period of time, the sense of superiority in their bones could not be erased. Li Mu counted with his fingers. He had not been in Shen Du for long, but he had offended the 3 provinces, 6 ministries, 9 temples, the Shao family, the Zhou family, and the academy. Other than the academy, he had offended almost everyone he could. Li Mu had already offended the Shao family and its old clique before he came to Shen Du. When he pushed for the abolition of the substitute crime silver, he had also beaten up the children of many officials in the Ministry of Rights, Ministry of Justice, Taichung Temple, and the 3 provinces and 6 ministries. With Zhou Chu's incident, he had also offended the Zhou family. He was only missing the academy to become the public enemy of Shen Du. Among the common people, the situation was the exact opposite. Li Mu was now very popular among the common people. He could go to the small restaurants on the street, to the brothels and taverns. As long as he wanted to, he could buy food, use, and entertainment for free. When he passed by the brothels, the brothel keeper ran out countless times, bringing along many girls. They all winked at Li Mu and said coquettishly, "Constable Li, come in." Xiao Bai was so scared that she did not care about the candied haws in her mouth. She ran over and hugged Li Mu's arm, holding her head high and chest out in front of them. Ever since Lu Hanyan went to Mount Baiyun to cultivate, she had been strictly carrying out the task given to her by Lu Hanyan. She did not allow any other seductress to appear beside Li Mu. These girls from the brothels were naturally her main targets of protection. The brothel keeper glanced at Xiao Bai and said to Li Mu, "Constable Li, why are you so shy? The girls are not charging you." Li Mu waved his hand. Next time, the Yamen had its own rules. In order to prevent officials from being corrupt, they could not eat or take the common people's food for free. They could not go to the brothels during the day. Of course, going to the brothels during the day was also forbidden. There were countless eyes in Luoyang staring at Li Mu. He had to be careful with his words and actions. He could not give anyone a chance to take advantage of him. Xiao Bai was still hugging Li Mu's arm tightly. She said, "Sister Lu said that when you come to Luoyang you can't fool around. You can't go to that kind of place." He was the one who saved the little fox, but she had become Lu Hanyan's spy. Li Mu looked at her and asked, "If I go to that kind of place, will you tell Sister Lu?" Xiao Bai nodded without hesitation. She said, "I promise, Sister Lu." Li Mu asked again, "If I don't let you tell her, will you listen to Sister Lu or me?" This question made Xiao Bai stop chewing on the candied hawthorn. She muttered, I. After a while, she lowered her head and said softly, I will listen to you, benefactor." Li Mu was comforted. Xiao Bai's answer proved that she was still his caring little girl. Even if she made a mistake, she would help him hide it. Who would not like a little girl like her? Of course, Li Mu would not make such a mistake. He just wanted to tease Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai lowered her head and hesitated for a while. Then she looked up and said, "Benefactor, if you want, Xiao Bai can do it too. I have already turned into a human." Li Mu patted her head and said, "I'm joking. I won't go to that kind of place." He knew very well that before Xiao Bai transformed, she was prepared to give herself to him at any time. However, she was placed by Lu Hanyan to keep an eye on Li Mu. If she betrayed Lu Hanyan and stole from him, how could the 2 of them be good sisters in the future? Although Xiao Bai was indeed very attractive, Li Mu would not lose the big picture for a small gain. He would not be greedy for a moment of pleasure and bury the fuse for a future Azura battlefield. After receiving Li Mu's promise, the girl became happy again. She happily held on to Li Mu's arm and turned back to stick out her tongue in the direction of the brothel. Along the way, Li Mu bought some snacks for Xiaobai. He was about to return to the yamen when his gaze inadvertently swept across the front. His gaze suddenly froze. Two figures walked past on the street in front of him. The two of them, one old and one young, did not see Li Mu. Li Mu did not recognize the young man. His gaze swept past him and stopped on the old man. This was the first time Li Mu saw this old man, but his figure overlapped with a figure in Li Mu's memory. To be precise, it was the memory of the assassin that Li Mu had obtained from Madame Chu in the North County. This old man was the one who had hired the assassin to assassinate Li Mu in the North County. He followed behind the young man step by step. It was obvious that the young man was the leader. In this way, the mastermind behind the assassination in the North County was about to be revealed. In the Shindu Yamen, Li Mu reached out and swiped the void. The image of a young man appeared in the air. Wang Wu looked at the image and said in shock, "No way, boss. You just killed Zhou Chuchu and now you've provoked Zhou Qian?" Chapter 234. Mr. Mei had warned Li Mu to be careful of the Zhou family. Li Mu thought that the assassination in the North County should have been done by the Zhou family. It was not until today that he met the old man in the memory of the assassin that he finally locked onto the mastermind behind the scenes. Through Wang Wu, Li Mu confirmed the man's identity once again. Zhou Qian was Zhou Chu's elder brother, but he was not Zhou Ting's son. Among the four brothers of the Zhou family, Zhou Ting was the fourth. Zhou Qian was the only son of the third brother. Zhou Qian usually kept a low profile and was not as flamboyant as Zhou Chu. He also did not bully the people, so the people of Luoyang did not know much about him. The old man beside him was his bodyguard. The disciples of the big families in Luoyang all had bodyguards, and these bodyguards were the closest to them. The fact that the old man appeared in the killer's memory meant that the assassination in Beijun was most likely Zhou Qian's plan. At that time, Li Mu had just defended the old party. If something happened to him, the old party would be the first to be suspected. However, Li Mu did not know whether Zhou Qian had acted on his own, or whether the real mastermind of the Zhou family was involved. The killer was dead, and Li Mu could not accuse Zhou Qian with just his words alone. Moreover, because of him, the Zhou family had just lost a young disciple. If Li Mu pointed the finger at Zhou Qian now, it might completely enrage the Zhou family and bring about their intense revenge. However, the revenge for the assassination had to be taken. As long as he knew the mastermind behind it, he could take his time to plan what to do next. Li Mu walked to the front of the yamen and saw Zhang Chun walking in listlessly. Li Mu greeted him, "Sir, you're out of court?" Ever since he was promoted to Luoyang magistrate, Zhang Chun's rank had risen from 6th grade to 5th grade, and he was qualified to attend court. Although there were many 5th-rank officials in Luoyang and not everyone had the opportunity to attend court, the Luoyang yamen was different from the 6 yamens. Above them there were assistant ministers, doctors and minister counselors. If they had nothing to do, they could stay in the yamen. Zhang Chun was the only official in charge of the yamen. Unlike Li Mu, who could sleep as long as he wanted with Xiaobai in his arms, Zhang Chun had to wake up early every 3 days to prepare for the morning court. Li Mu replied, "Your Excellency left court today, so you're a bit late." Zhang Chun waved his hand and said, "Don't mention it. The quarrel in the court today was too intense." The guy behind this official almost sprayed his saliva all over this official's face. Li Mu asked curiously, "What's the matter?" Zhang Chun said, "It's all because of the academy. His Majesty thinks that almost all the officials in the 36 counties of the Great Zhou, including Luoyang, are from the academy. In the long run, it will be detrimental to the country. He wants to give up some of the positions of the officials and directly select them from the people. However, the officials are against it," Li Mu said. "That's good." Zhang Chun glanced at him and said, "What's good about it?" Before the academy, the morals and abilities of the officials in the imperial court were uneven. Many untalented and incompetent people could also hold important positions in the imperial court. The people suffered unspeakably. After the academy, the quality of the officials has greatly improved. If the selection of officials goes back to the old days, won't the people suffer that kind of pain again? It seemed that Zhang Chun also supported the academy. Li Mu asked, "Your Excellency, are you also from the academy?" Hearing this, Zhang Chun's face showed a proud expression. He said, "Yes. When I was young I studied in the Myriad Scroll Academy. After I finished my studies in the academy I became the county magistrate of Yangqiu." Li Mu asked. "Before the academy the people suffered unspeakably. After the academy the people's lives became better?" Zhang Chun's lips moved, but he found that he could not answer Li Mu. Before Emperor Wen, after the golden age of Emperor Wu, the counties were no longer troubled by the demons and ghosts. However, the people's lives did not seem to be better. After the death of Emperor Wen, the quality of the officials was greatly improved. Today the people should be living a better life. However, as far as he knew, the people of the 36 counties of Great Zhou were far from living in peace and contentment. He looked at Li Mu and asked, "Do you mean that Emperor Wen was wrong?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "Emperor Wen was not wrong. However, the decrees of Emperor Wen's time are not necessarily suitable for the present. During Emperor Wen's time, the officials in the imperial court were both good and bad. There was a big flaw in the way the imperial court chose officials. Emperor Wen's decisive reform led to the famous rule of Emperor Wen. At that time, the academy was beneficial to improving the ecology of the imperial court. But it's different now. The chaos of the imperial court during Emperor Wen's time has long disappeared. The students of the academy have almost monopolized the imperial court. The officials are divided into camps based on the academy. They form cliques and protect each other. The decrees of Emperor Wen's time are no longer suitable for the current imperial court." Zhang Chun looked at him with a strange expression and said, "I really should let you attend the imperial court. If you were there in the morning, there would not be no one to speak for Her Majesty." Li Mu was very sure that many people in the imperial court must have seen what he saw. However, they were all from the academy. If they agreed with the Empress, wouldn't they be standing on the opposite side of the academy? They already belonged to their own camp. Naturally, they would not betray their own camp. Moreover, with the power and influence of the academy, even the new party and the old party had to rely on it. Who in the imperial court dared to oppose the academy? Li Mu could imagine the scene of Her Majesty being opposed by the officials in the morning court. Unfortunately, he was only a minor official and was not even qualified to defend her. Li Mu did not know much about the academy. After calling Wang Wu, he had a better understanding of the academy. There were 4 great academies in the divine capital. They were called Baichuan, Qingyun, Wanwan, and Bailu. They started during the reign of Emperor Wen and had been passed down for more than 100 years. Among the 4 great academies, Bailu Academy was different from the other 3. It was the only academy that was directly under the Ministry of War. The dean of Bailu Academy was the Minister of War. The purpose of Bailu Academy's existence was to defend against foreign enemies. It had never been involved in political struggles. Almost all the students from Bailu Academy would not stay in the divine capital. They needed to go to the borders of the Great Zhou to protect the border counties and prevent the neighboring countries, the Demon Country, the Ghost Region, and the Dragon Clan from invading. Fortunately, after the martial emperor, the Great Zhou had become the most powerful country in the ancestral land. Most of the surrounding countries respected the Great Zhou. Those who did not respect the Great Zhou as their sovereign country did not dare to offend the Great Zhou. The Demon Country and the Ghost Region had always been in a state of internal strife. They did not pose much of a threat to the Great Zhou for the time being. Although the Dragon Clan was powerful, they lived in the sea for a long time and rarely appeared on the mainland. The current situation of the Great Zhou was more of an internal problem than an external one. Wanwan Academy focused on teaching the concept of governance and governance. Many of the students from Wanwan Academy did not know how to cultivate, but they all had unique views on how to govern a country. After graduating from the academy, those who were more capable would stay in the divine capital to take up positions. Those who were less capable would be sent to other places to train. Qingyun Academy and Baichuan Academy focused more on cultivation. Those who studied in these 2 academies were all students with a certain level of cultivation talent. After leaving the academy, they would either take up important positions in the divine capital or guard a county. They had the brightest future. There were 36 counties in the Great Zhou, and at least 90 of them came from these 2 academies. There were 106 county governors, county ministers, and county lieutenants. Of course, the academies did not belong to any political party. In terms of cohesion, they were naturally not as united as the new party or the old party. However, the status of the academies was extraordinary. The students who graduated from the academies all had a deep sense of belonging to the academies. Perhaps they were dissatisfied with the academies when they were studying, but they would never allow outsiders to trample on the dignity of the academies. Whether it was in the divine capital or in the various counties, officials who came from the same academy would naturally have a close relationship. Everything was shown in the imperial court and they would form a cohesive group. The imperial palace. It was already late at night. The empress stood in the empty palace. She no longer looked dignified in front of others. There was still anger on her face. She was angry about what happened in the imperial court. She looked around, trying to find someone to talk to and vent her frustrations. However, she could not find anyone. In fact, since she was forced to take this position 3 years ago, there was no one she could talk to. That person was right. Sitting in this position, she would slowly lose her family and friends. No one would reveal their true feelings to her. Her parents called her Her Majesty and wanted her to pass the throne to a descendant of the Zhou family. Her former friends only had respect and fear for her now. She had gotten everything that others wanted, but she had lost everything that she wanted. She walked out of the palace and looked up at the sky. Suddenly she thought of someone. The Li residence. Li Mu was sleeping soundly with Xiaobai in his arms. Suddenly white mist filled his vision. A familiar figure appeared in front of him. Li Mu had not seen his other personality for a long time. When he saw her again, he felt a sense of familiarity. He waved at her and said, "Long time no see." Although the interaction between the two personalities was not very pleasant in the beginning, she did not appear every day. She also did not torture Li Mu every time she appeared. Li Mu was not as afraid of her as he was in the beginning. The beautiful woman's expression was a little ugly. She did not pay attention to Li Mu. Li Mu's heart skipped a beat. He wondered if she was on her period. Would her inner demons be on their period? In order to prevent her from venting her anger on him, Li Mu prepared to slip away. The next moment the scenery in front of him changed. The two of them appeared at the peak of a mountain. There was a pavilion at the peak of the mountain. At this moment the two of them were sitting in the pavilion. There were a few exquisite dishes in front of them. The aroma of the dishes made Li Mu swallow a mouthful of saliva. He complained in his heart. Whose dream was this? Why was her control of the dream more skillful than his? The surrounding scenery was so real. Li Mu could hear the birds, smell the fragrance of flowers and even feel the mountain breeze blowing on his face. The few dishes in front of him were so delicious that Li Mu began to wonder whether this was a dream or reality. Legend has it that the powerhouses of the upper realm can use a kind of dream transference ability. They can use their consciousness to invade other people's dreams and freely weave the content of the dream. The person who was transferred by the dream would not be able to distinguish between the dream and reality. They would even be trapped in it forever. Li Mu looked around and could not help but sigh. The legendary dream transference technique was just like this, right? Li Mu looked at the woman opposite him and asked, "Are you in a bad mood?" The woman did not answer, but the answer was written on her face. Li Mu did not know why a heart demon would be in a bad mood. He poured a cup of wine for the two of them and said, "Since you are in a bad mood, I will accompany you to drink a few cups." He gulped down the wine in his cup and sighed softly. The woman looked at him and asked, "What are you sighing for?" There was nothing to hide from his other self. Li Mu said leisurely, "Unfortunately, I am not Lord Zhang. Otherwise, in today's morning court, I would not have let His Majesty face the officials alone." The woman raised her eyebrows, looked at Li Mu and said, "What's so good about that woman? She is just a rebel who seized power and stole the country. Is it worth it for you to protect her like this?" Bang! Li Mu slammed the wine cup on the stone table, stood up abruptly and said impolitely, "If you disrespect His Majesty again, I will go back. You can drink this wine alone." The mouth of the person who received it was soft. After receiving so many benefits from the Empress, Li Mu could not protect her in the court. If he could not even protect her in the dream, then the next time he received benefits from the Empress, his conscience would not be at ease. The woman did not expect that this sentence would anger Li Mu. Her gaze swept over him and she lowered her head and said, "Well, I will not speak ill of her. Sit down." Chapter 235. Li Mu didn't know what other people's inner demons were like, but his seemed to be somewhat different. She obviously didn't have much desire to erode Li Mu's consciousness and occupy his body. Instead, she was not very friendly to the Empress. Was it because of jealousy? Speaking of which, Li Mu was also a little jealous of the Empress at first. After all, she was young and had a high position. She had stepped into the upper realm before the age of 30. Who wouldn't be envious of her? Could it be that the birth of this woman was due to Li Mu's jealousy? Cultivation was really dangerous at every step. Even a small emotion in the heart could be infinitely magnified. The inner demons had no substance. If he wanted to overcome or eliminate them, he had to rely on his inner cultivation. The beautiful woman took a sip of wine and asked, "You have never met her, why are you so protective of her?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty treats me sincerely, so I should treat your Majesty sincerely. Moreover, although your Majesty is a woman compared to the previous emperors of the Great Zhou, her wisdom and virtue should be at the forefront. The North County girl died unjustly, and the court covered up a corrupt official. Your Majesty upheld justice for her. The Academy has become a chronic disease of the Great Zhou, and the students of the Academy have formed cliques for selfish interests and control the court. No one in the court dares to mention it. Only your Majesty is aggressive and brave to reform. Isn't such a person worthy of respect and protection?" After Li Mu finished speaking, he raised his head and drank a glass of wine, secretly feeling pity in his heart. If these words were heard by the Empress, she might be happy and reward him with some treasures. Unfortunately, he didn't even have the chance to see the Empress and could only talk to himself in his dreams. The woman took a deep look at Li Mu and didn't say anything in the end. She drank alone. Although Li Mu was curious, he didn't ask much. A personality with self-consciousness to some extent was a completely different person. They had their own fantasy life and identity. Li Mu had seen a movie before in which the protagonist had 10 personalities with different identities. Their gender, age, and identity were different, and between the different personalities they would kill each other. Judging from the current situation, Li Mu and his other self were getting along quite well. Even if she wanted to harm Li Mu could still exit the dream at any time. She didn't seem to have such thoughts either. When he woke up from his dream, Li Mu was still reminiscing about the delicious food in his dream. Unfortunately, a dream was still a dream. When he woke up, he couldn't recall the taste of those delicacies. After washing up and eating breakfast, he went to the yamen with Xiao Bai. Li Mu was about to go out on patrol when he saw Mr. Mei and 2 other people outside the government office. Li Mu stepped forward and asked, "Sister Mei, what's the matter?" Mr. Mei said, "Jiangyin County offered a batch of tribute pears yesterday. His Majesty asked me to give you a box." Li Mu was a little flattered. Although it was just a box of pears, it represented His Majesty the Empress's intentions. It meant that she would think of him for such a small matter. During the transportation of this kind of tribute, Fulu would be stuck on the box. Even if it was transported to Shendu, it would be no different from freshly picked ones. Li Mu took one for himself and gave one to Xiao Bai. He took a bite of the tribute pear and found that the pear skin was thin, juicy, and sweet. It was worthy of being chosen as a tribute pear. Mr. Mei said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back to the palace first." "Wait." Li Mu suddenly stopped her and asked, "Sister Mei, what should I do if I encounter an inner demon in the process of cultivation?" Li Mu knew very little about inner demons. Even Thousand Illusions Shangren was not omniscient. Faced with this kind of thing that he had never encountered in his cultivation, Li Mu did not know how to deal with it for a moment. Although Mr. Mei's cultivation was not as high as Thousand Illusions Shangren's, she was by the Empress's side and must have seen many things. Perhaps she could explain to Li Mu. "Inner demon?" Mr. Mei frowned and asked, "You encountered an inner demon?" Li Mu nodded. Mr. Mei continued to ask, "What kind of inner demon?" Li Mu described, "Sometimes I dream of a woman." Mr. Mei glanced at him. "Isn't it normal to dream of a woman?" Li Mu explained, "It's not what you think. It's a strange woman. I've dreamed of her more than once. She seems to have independent thoughts and can even control my dreams. More than once, independent thoughts." Mr. Mei frowned and asked, "Can she control your body?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "That won't happen." "That's strange." Mr. Mei said in surprise, "Once an inner demon of this level appears, it will definitely fight for control of the body. If it wins, it will completely control the original body. If it loses, its consciousness will be destroyed. It's very rare for 2 consciousnesses to coexist." Li Mu asked, "In other words, it's possible for such a situation to exist?" Mr. Mei nodded and said, As far as I know, there are very few people who have more than two consciousnesses coexisting in their bodies. Most of the time his body is dominated by the main consciousness, but when he encounters a life and death crisis, the other consciousness will awaken. This kind of second consciousness can sometimes be more terrifying than the main consciousness. Li Mu felt that he was in this situation as Mr. Mei said. In his dreams, the woman could turn the tables and easily beat Li Mu. Her strength was very terrifying. Although the two of them could coexist peacefully for the time being, no one could say for sure what would happen in the future. Li Mu asked, "How do I get rid of this kind of inner demon?" Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "You can only rely on yourself to defeat the inner demon. When your consciousness is strong enough, you can easily erase the consciousness of the inner demon." She looked at Li Mu and asked, "What does your inner demon look like?" Li Mu reached out and swiped in the air. A woman's shadow appeared in the air. This was a small spell that could be mastered in the Zhou Xian stage. It was a weakened version of the art of black light. The art of black light of the cultivators in Dongxian could turn stillness into motion and appear in real time. It could surpass the power of heaven and earth and reappear the past that had already happened. It was said that the most powerful cultivators in the ninth realm could even see the future temporarily through this spell. As for whether it was true or not, Li Mu didn't know. Mr. Mei looked at the woman. A trace of surprise flashed through his eyes and his mouth opened slightly. Li Mu saw the change in her expression and had a bad feeling. He asked, What's wrong?" Mr. Mei coughed and his expression returned to normal. He asked, "When did you get this inner demon?" Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "I think it was the night when His Majesty abolished the substitutes in silver. I met her for the first time in my dream. She tied me up and whipped me." Thinking of what happened in his dream that night, Li Mu still felt a bit aggrieved. Hearing this, Mr. Mei's expression was very strange. It seemed like he wanted to laugh but was trying hard to hold it in. A few black lines appeared on Li Mu's forehead as he asked, "Are you laughing at me?" Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "No, huh?" Seeing Li Mu's serious face, she coughed and said, "I'm not laughing at you. I just thought of something funny." "Huh?" She put one hand on Li Mu's shoulder and the other hand on her stomach. After laughing, she said, panting, "Don't worry. There are all kinds of strange things on the road of cultivation. The inner demon isn't all bad. She doesn't want to take over your body. Just think of it as a dream. Isn't it good to go on dates with a beautiful woman in your dreams?" Li Mu asked suspiciously, "Is it really okay?" Mr. Mei patted him on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry. It's okay." Judging from Mr. Mei's tone, she didn't seem to be lying to Li Mu or comforting Li Mu. For now, Li Mu didn't feel that the woman was a threat to him. He shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Mr. Mei said, "Haven't you always wanted to know about His Majesty? Since we're free now, I'll tell you." When Li Mu heard this, he was instantly interested. Mr. Mei said, "Since you're already His Majesty's man, there's something you need to know." Li Mu asked, "What's the matter?" Mr. Mei said, "People say that His Majesty stole the Emperor's qi from the ancestral temple and used it to transcend and take over the world. You think so too, don't you?" Li Mu asked, "Is there more to it than meets the eye?" Mr. Mei said, "It's true that His Majesty got the Emperor's qi, but he didn't do it willingly. When he married the former crown prince, became the Empress and obtained the Emperor's qi, it was all part of the Zhou family's scheme." Li Mu really didn't know that there was such an inside story. He continued to listen to Mr. Mei. The Emperor's qi is condensed from the psyche power of the people of the Great Zhou. The 36 counties of the Great Zhou collect the psyche power of the people through the ancestral temple and gather it in the ancestral temple. It will gradually nurture a strand of Emperor's qi. Obtaining this Emperor's qi can allow mortals to transcend. In the past, it would be passed to the Emperor to ensure the continuation of the Great Zhou dynasty. There were shortcuts to cultivation. Some shortcuts could even allow one to reach the sky in one step. Xiao Yu, with the body of a mortal, was able to move heaven and earth and advance 5 realms in a row. The methods of the royal family of the Great Zhou were obviously more brilliant. They used the psyche power of hundreds of millions of people to cultivate, so that there would always be a powerhouse of the upper realm in the royal family to ensure the continuation of imperial power. However, during the last change of imperial power, this strand of Emperor's qi was obtained by an outsider, causing the Xiao royal family to lose their opportunity. It was no wonder that Her Majesty could succeed the throne so smoothly. After Emperor Wen, the Great Zhou showed signs of decline. The people's sentiment decreased year by year. The last strand of emperor's qi was formed after 2 generations of emperors. In other words, the Shao royal family had not produced a powerhouse of the upper realm for decades. The cultivation of the previous 2 emperors stopped at Zhou Xian. If there was no powerhouse to guard the country, they would not be able to intimidate the surrounding countries, not to mention the Yao nation and the Ghost realm. Even if the Shao clan was unwilling, they could only temporarily let the empress succeed the throne. It was precisely because the Zhou family understood this that they were able to take advantage of the Shao clan. Mr. Mei looked at Li Mu and said, "You are one of Her Majesty's people. I don't want you to misunderstand Her Majesty like others." Li Mu nodded and said solemnly, "I understand." Mr. Mei asked, "Besides these, do you have anything else you want to ask?" Li Mu thought for a while and asked, "It is said that the former crown prince likes men and that he and Her Majesty are only husband and wife on the surface. Is that true?" Chapter 236. Bang. As soon as Li Mu finished speaking, Mr. Mei hit him on the head. Mr. Mei glared at him and said, "Didn't I tell you not to criticize Her Majesty? If other internal guards heard you, you would be hung up and beaten." Li Mu rubbed his head and said, "Isn't it right in front of you?" Mr. Mei snorted and said, "Not even in front of me." Li Mu shook his head and said, Okay, I won't ask any more." Gossiping was human nature. The higher a person's status was, the more people would gossip about them. Not only Li Mu, but many people in Luoyang were gossiping about this. "Okay, I've delivered Her Majesty's reward. I'm going back to the palace." Mr. Mei looked at him angrily and said, "Her Majesty is as pure as ice and as pure as jade. Don't talk about her behind her back. Not only can you not talk about her, but you can't let others talk about her either." Li Mu stood up straight and said seriously, "Yes, Your Majesty." He called her sister Mei all the time and it was not in vain. In the end she answered Li Mu indirectly to satisfy his gossiping. A pure as ice and as pure as jade solved Li Mu's doubts. The fire of gossip was extinguished. Li Mu saw Zhang Chun standing at the door of the side hall and asked, "Sir, do you want to eat a pear? This pear is very sweet. It's the tribute pear given by Her Majesty." Zhang Chun walked out and asked, "What did you do? Why did Her Majesty suddenly reward you?" Li Mu said, "Nothing. Maybe there are too many tribute pears in Jiangyin County and Her Majesty can't finish them all." Hearing this, Zhang Chun looked at Li Mu and wanted to spit at him. Even if Her Majesty could not finish the tribute pears and wanted to reward the officials, there was no reason for her to skip over him, the magistrate of Luoyang, and reward the arrestor of Luoyang. Moreover, Her Majesty rewarding a house and a box of pears were 2 completely different things. Because of their meritorious service, His Majesty had rewarded many people with residences. Although the value of this box of pears was very low and could not be compared to the official residence, it represented the emperor's heart. This meant that His Majesty still had Li Mu in his heart. Even if he did not make any contributions, His Majesty might still think of him when he woke up, slept, or ate. What kind of heavenly grace was this? Zhang Chun took a pear and took a bite. "What kind of tribute pear is this? It's so sour." He put the pear in his mouth, grabbed 2 more pears from the box with both hands and left. Xiao Bai chewed on the pear and said, "This pear is obviously very sweet. It's not sour at all." Li Mu, maybe he just happened to pick a sour one. He waved his hand at Wang Wu at the door and said, "These are the tribute pears bestowed by His Majesty. Take them and distribute them among your brothers." It was just a box of tribute pears, but it was a sharp weapon to win people's hearts. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he could win over a wave of people's hearts for himself and Her Majesty. Mr. Mei was right. Many people criticized the process of the Empress seizing the throne. Even most of the officials in Great Zhou did not like to see a woman become the Empress. Li Mu said to the people who had been summoned by Wang Wu, "After eating, go out and patrol. If you find any illegal behavior that you can't handle, come to me." The constables each took a pear and said to Li Mu, "Thank you, boss." Li Mu waved his hand. "This is a reward from Her Majesty. If you want to thank someone, thank Her Majesty." Imperial Palace. Chengel Hall. In the void of the hall, there was a picture quietly flowing. The young female official snorted and said, "This person is rude to Her Majesty again. Why don't we take him to the internal guards and teach him a good lesson?" Mr. Mei came in from outside the hall. Seeing the scene of the Luoyang government and hearing the young female official's words, he already realized what had happened. He said, "Your Majesty, although Li Mu's words are a bit presumptuous, he is absolutely loyal to your Majesty. He always protects your Majesty and thinks that your Majesty." The young female official said with a cold face, "If we don't teach him a good lesson this time, who knows what other offensive words he will say to your Majesty in the future." The Empress looked calm as if she was not angry at all. She just said, "Mei Wei, send him another box of tribute pears tomorrow." Mr. Mei bowed and said, "Yes, your Majesty." The young female official said angrily, "Your Majesty. Your Majesty will leave first." Mr. Mei took her hand and pulled her out of the hall. The young female official shook off his hand and said unhappily, "He was disrespectful to your Majesty. Why are you always protecting him?" Mr. Mei said to her, "If your Majesty wants to punish him, she will. We don't have to do anything about it." The young female official said angrily, "What's so good about him? He was disrespectful to your Majesty. You protect him and your Majesty is so tolerant of him. Not only did she give him the tribute pears that your Majesty likes to eat, but she also used the dark light technique to look at him." Her chest heaved up and down. Obviously she was very angry. For someone like her who worshipped the Empress, it was hard for her to accept all this. "Shoo." Mr. Mei made a shushing gesture and said, "It's because he was disrespectful to your Majesty that your Majesty treats him differently from others." The young female official frowned. Obviously she didn't understand what he meant. Mr. Mei explained, "You're still young. There are some things that you don't understand. It's lonely at the top. When your Majesty is in that position, everyone, including us, respects and fears her. After a long time your Majesty will get tired. Sometimes what she needs is someone who disrespects her." The young female official said, "What kind of twisted logic is that?" Mr. Mei shook his head and said, "Your Majesty didn't want to be in this position. She's much lonelier than we thought. In front of us she only shows one side, but in fact the side that she hides is the real her." Li Mu walked out of the government office. He looked up at the sky and scratched his head in confusion. Since just now he had a strange feeling that someone was spying on him in the dark. This feeling came and went. Li Mu searched for a long time but he couldn't find the source. In this situation either he had an illusion, or the spying person's cultivation was much higher than his and used a high-level magic like the art of mystic light. The latter was unlikely. Li Mu had the jade pendant given to him by the Empress. It could isolate heaven's secrets, block the calculations of transcendent cultivators, and also block the art of mystic light. After leaving the government office, this feeling disappeared completely. He patrolled the government office with Xiaobai. At night, when he was sitting cross-legged on the bed to cultivate, sleepiness suddenly attacked him. Li Mu had experienced this feeling of sleepiness for no reason several times. He already knew what would happen next. Sure enough, after a mist appeared in front of him, the woman's figure appeared in front of Li Mu. She stretched out her hands and a whip appeared in her hands. It was a whip that Li Mu hadn't seen for a long time. Li Mu's eyelids twitched and his expression changed greatly. He immediately said, "What do you want?" The woman said indifferently, "Nothing, I just want to exchange pointers with you." "What exchange?" It was clearly a one-sided trampling. Li Mu quickly stretched out his hand and said, "Stop, even if you want to exchange pointers you don't have to use force. We can exchange pointers." The woman glanced at him and asked, "What kind of grammar?" Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, "Do you know how to play Go?" The woman said, "I know a little about the rules." Li Mu closed his eyes and meditated. A stone table and 2 stone chairs appeared in front of them. A chessboard was carved on the stone table and next to the chessboard was a chessboard. Li Mu picked up a black piece and placed it in the corner of the chessboard. He immediately said, "It's your turn." In the dream, Li Mu couldn't beat her. He could only make a prompt decision and make the decision for her. Although Li Mu's Go skills weren't high, it was still easy for him to beat a rookie who knew a little about the rules. The woman glanced at Li Mu, picked up the white piece and placed it in another place. Li Mu sighed in relief. He suspected that today was a special day for her every month. Fortunately, he was quick-witted and made a prompt decision to avoid being trampled on by her. After a moment, the woman placed a single word and said to Li Mu, "You lost." Li Mu stared blankly at the chessboard. Only then did he realize that what she said about knowing a little about the rules and what he understood were not the same at all. The woman looked at him and shook her head. It's boring to exchange pointers. Let's exchange pointers. Wait. Li Mu stretched out his hand again and said, one game doesn't mean anything. We'll win 2 out of 3 games. He closed his eyes and concentrated. The chessboard on the table suddenly changed and the boundary between Chu and Han appeared. The woman looked at the strange chessboard and asked, what is this? Chinese chess. There was no such thing as Chinese chess in this world. Li Mu smiled and said, if you don't know how, I can teach you. The woman learned very quickly. Li Mu only explained the rules of Chinese chess to her once, and she was already able to move. Of course, after 20 moves she lost to Li Mu. Li Mu sighed in relief and clasped his fist. Thank you for letting me win. I admit it. The woman didn't even raise her head. She rearranged the pieces and said, again. Although it was a bit shameless to attack her weakness with his strength, Li Mu could only be shameless once in order to not be trampled on. This time the woman played very slowly. After 30 moves Li Mu frowned. He didn't expect her to learn so quickly. If this continued he was afraid that he would lose this game. He picked up a chess piece, thought for a moment and ate one of her pieces. The woman looked at him and asked, why can your pawn take 2 moves? Li Mu explained, you don't know, right? This pawn is an elite. Can take 2 moves. The woman didn't say anything and continued playing. Li Mu picked up a chess piece and ate another one of her pieces. The woman frowned. Why does your horse move, but not son? Li Mu explained, this is only a fine horse. It can move, The woman didn't say anything and moved the chess piece again. Li Mu's carriage turned and ate her piece. She looked up at Li Mu and asked, why doesn't your carriage go in a straight line? Li Mu smiled and asked, isn't it common knowledge that a carriage can turn? The woman was silent for a moment. She stretched out her hand and the whip appeared again. She stood up and looked at Li Mu. Show your weapon,